Chapter 1. Shadows over Thornwick. Manna, a chill wind stirred the last scarlet leaves on the ancient yew trees that flanked the iron gates of Thornwick Manor. Beneath a slate-grey sky, Hercule Poirot's handsome cab rattled over the gravel drive, depositing him before the imposing facade of the old estate. He stepped down, straightening his frock coat, and surveying the withered garden that lay to his right, a tangled expanse of skeletal rose bushes, brittle lavender stalks, and shattered stone urns half swallowed by ivy. Even in late autumn, a garden should retain some vestige of beauty. This one seemed cursed to an endless winter. Poirot adjusted his bowler, his little grey cells already humming with curiosity. A footman approached, his polished boots echoing on the marble steps. "Monsieur Poirot, Lady Aldridge awaits you in the drawing-room." "Merci," Poirot replied, allowing his keen eyes to sweep the scene. A peacock-blue scarf draped over. The butler's arm hinted at Lady Aldridge's signature taste for vivid colour, an ironic contrast to the dying garden. Whatever trouble had brought Poirot here, he suspected it centred not only on fading blooms, but on something far more sinister. He followed the footman through the wide front hall, past oil paintings of stern ancestors, and a grand staircase whose balustrade was carved in twisting rose vines. At the far end, a pair of French doors opened into the drawing-room, where a solitary woman stood by the hearth. Her back was to him, and she wore a deep emerald gown that brushed the oriental carpet with every measured step. "Madam," Poirot said softly, removing his hat. Lady Eleanor Aldridge turned, revealing a face both elegant and drawn. Her pale hair was pinned back in a severe twist, and dark circles under her eyes spoke of many sleepless nights. "Monsieur Poirot," she murmured, her voice brittle as winter frost. "Thank you for coming so promptly." "Madame," Poirot said, inclining his head with polite gravity, "I received your letter concerning the tragic state of your garden, and the more tragic disappearance of your husband. Pray, tell me everything." She led him to a settee facing the hearth. Poirot seated himself, hands folded. His expression bespoke both empathy and authority. Lady Aldridge sank onto the cushions, clutching a handkerchief. "It began 5 days ago," she said, voice catching. "My husband, Sir Reginald Aldridge, rose before dawn, as was his habit, to inspect the walled garden. He discovered the rose pergola collapsed, the fountain bone dry, and the soil turned to dust." She paused, her fingers trembling. "He called for me in alarm, but by the time I arrived, he had already vanished." "Vanished?" Poirot's eyebrows rose. Did he simply leave the garden and never return? Lady Aldridge swallowed. "Yes. His private key was left in the garden shed. His riding-coat remained here. There was no note, no trace of where he went." "Madam, did any servants see him that morning?" She shook her head. "Only the gardener, Mr. Finch, who discovered the ruin at first light. But he was away, fallen ill with fever, and the head gardener, Mrs. Smythe, was tending the greenhouses and did not enter the walled garden until later." Poirot made a quick note. "So, no eyewitnesses to Sir Reginald's departure. And when did Mr. Finch and Mrs. Smythe arrive on the scene?" She glanced at a gilt clock above the mantel. "Mrs. Smythe came around 7. Finch did not return until the next day." Poirot tapped his fingertips together. "And the garden itself? Has anyone interfered with it recently? Pruning, planting, or perhaps something more malicious?" Dexter. Aldridge's eyes filled with tears. We engaged a horticultural expert, Mr. Byron, to advise on restoring the ancient rose stocks, but he hardly spent an hour here before vanishing too. His report was brief. He warned that the soil was poisoned beyond recovery. "Poisoned soil," Poirot murmured, "and yet your greenhouses remain lush." She nodded. Inside the glass houses, the exotic orchids and palms survive. But the walled garden, once famed for its spring bloom, lies dead. Poirot rose, pacing before the hearth. It is a puzzle of both botany and human behaviour. Poisoned soil suggests an intentional act. Someone wished the heart of Thornwick to perish, but Sir Reginald's disappearance hints at something more personal. He stopped before Lady Aldridge. "Madame, have you any enemies? Family disputes, business rivals, or perhaps a love rival?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. Reginald was not a man of conflict. He was gentle, devoted to his plants and to me. Yet I recall a heated exchange between him and his cousin, Julian Aldridge, over the inheritance of the estate. "Cousin Julian," Poirot repeated. "And where is he now?" Lady Aldridge rose and poured 2 cups of tea from a silver pot. "Julian lives nearby at Rosewood Lodge, but dear Reginald forbade me from involving him in the garden's restoration. He believed Julian only cared for the estate's value." Poirot accepted a cup, noting the delicate bone china. "Madame, you had horticultural expertise brought in. Then the expert fled. Your gardener fell ill, and the soil itself was poisoned. Finally, your husband disappeared. One might suspect a chain of intimidation." Lady Aldridge's hands trembled as she clasped the teacup. "My husband feared something, though he offered no explanation. When he vanished, I felt as if the garden had claimed him. Tragic imagery, but concrete facts we require." Poirot's voice remained calm. "Madame, I shall need to see the walled garden itself, the shed and the greenhouses. For now, tell me of Mr. Byron's report. Did he mention any specific toxin?" She shook her head. "He only said faintly that the soil bore traces of arsenic, and something more obscure, a salt I've never heard of." Poirot sipped his tea thoughtfully. "Arsenic kills plants slowly, turning leaves brown before they wither. A salt could disrupt the soil's pH entirely, rendering it sterile." He leaned forward. "Madame, was Sir Reginald working with any unusual fertilizers or treatments before this disaster?" Lady Aldridge considered. "He applied a new nitrogen-rich manure mixture from a supplier in London. He was excited to trial it until the expert cautioned him against its purity." "From London?" Poirot repeated. "We should trace that, supplier, and I shall review Mr. Byron's brief report." He rose. "Will you ask Mrs. Smythe and Mr. Finch to meet me here shortly? I require their accounts first-hand." Lady Aldridge nodded. "Of course, I will send word." Poirot adjusted. His cravat. "We have the makings of a curious affair, madame. A garden poisoned, a gardener ill, an expert frightened off, and the master of the house vanished. All signs point to deliberate sabotage, yet perhaps also to something more hidden." She rose, as well, concern etched in her features. "Then we must begin at once. I pray you find Sir Reginald, Monsieur Poirot." He offered her a reassuring smile. "Do not fear, madame. I shall employ every means, observation, deduction, and the little grey cells, to restore both your husband and your beloved garden. As he stepped toward the window, the withered rose bushes stirred in the wind like hollow sentinels. Poirot gazed upon them with resolve. In the heart of decay lay a secret, and he would unearth it before the moon rose again over Thornwick Manor. Chapter 2. Secrets in the Soil. The morning after Poirot's arrival dawned cold and mist-laden over Thornwick Manor. Inside the grand dining room, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow upon the polished mahogany table set for breakfast. Lady Eleanor Aldridge entered with purposeful grace, her emerald gown replaced by a soft grey morning robe. She paused at the table's head, welcoming her guests with a tight but courteous smile. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, gesturing to a fine china cup of Darjeeling tea, "I trust you slept well?" Poirot, impeccably dressed in his morning suit, rose to bow. "Madame, the night was peaceful, and my rest, though brief, was most restorative." He inhaled the aroma of freshly baked raisin scones. "But my thoughts turn already to the mystery at hand." Lady Aldridge inclined her head. "Indeed, I have summoned Mrs. Smythe, the head gardener, and Mr. Finch, Sir Reginald's gardener, to speak with you immediately afterward. Shall we proceed in the library?" He nodded. "Yes, madam. And I would also like to examine the soil samples Mr. Byron collected, if they remain." She led him from the dining room down a panelled corridor into the library, where floor to ceiling shelves held volumes on horticulture, local history, and in one corner Sir Reginald's meticulously kept botanical journals. On a side table lay the small leather satchel belonging to Mr. Byron. Its flap was secured by a single brass clasp. "Before we begin interviews," Poirot said, opening the satchel, "allow me first to inspect these samples." He withdrew 3 small cork-stopped vials, each labelled in Byron's neat hand: rose bed, vegetable plot, and centre fountain. He uncorked the first and inhaled carefully. Ah, faint traces of arsenic, as Lady Aldridge related, but also this curious odour, burnt almonds mixed with something metallic. Lady Aldridge's brow furrowed. Byron described it vaguely as a salt, but said it was unlike anything he had encountered. Poirot nodded, replacing the stopper. "I must compare these with control samples from the greenhouses, and from soil untouched by Byron's visit. Madam, might I ask Mrs. Smythe to provide fresh soil from the greenhouse border?" "Of course," Lady Aldridge replied. She tapped a small silver bell. "Margaret," she called to a discreet footman in the doorway, "please fetch Mrs. Smythe and Mr. Finch to the library, and 3 fresh scoops of greenhouse soil." The footman bowed and departed. Poirot closed the satchel and turned to Lady Aldridge. "While we await them, tell me more of Mr. Byron's visit. Why did he leave in such haste?" Lady Aldridge sank into a wing-back chair. "He arrived 2 days ago, bringing equipment to test pH and contamination levels. He worked all afternoon in the rose bed, murmuring about aberrations in the soil. At sunset, he collected his vials, and next morning his room at the nearby inn was empty. His papers scattered on the desk, and a note reading only 'enough.' He vanished without word. Was there any sign of violence or theft?" Poirot asked. "No," she said. "His satchel remained intact, his wallet untouched. He simply chose to leave." She glanced toward the window, where the withered garden lay shrouded in mist. I fear whatever he discovered frightened him deeply. Poirot rose, pacing slowly before the shelves. Fear can be a powerful motive. Yet Mr. Byron, though a man of science, could not vanish entirely. Someone must have sheltered him, or compelled him away. As he spoke, the library door opened to admit Mrs. Smythe, a sturdy woman in her 50s with soil-stained gloves and pursed lips, followed by Mr. Finch, pale and still unwell, supported by the footman. The two approached with cautious deference. "Madame, monsieur," Mrs. Smythe said, curtsying, "you asked for us." "Thank you both for coming," Lady Aldridge said. Poirot gestured to two chairs. "Please, be seated. I have questions for you." Mrs. Smythe settled primly, while Mr. Finch sank wearily into his chair, removing his gloves to reveal reddened hands. Poirot spoke softly. "Mrs. Smythe, you tend the greenhouse plants. Have you noticed any sign of contamination there? Yellowing, leaves, stunted growth, or strange residues?" She shook her head. "Not at all, monsieur. The palms and orchids flourish, as they always have. It is only the walled garden that lies barren. Very well." Poirot turned to Finch. "Mr. Finch, you were Sir Reginald's personal gardener in the walled garden. You fell ill and were absent when he disappeared. Tell me of the day you last saw him." Mr. Finch's voice was weak. "It was the day before he vanished. I arrived at dawn to prune the boxwood hedges. Sir Reginald was already there, examining the rose pergola's supports. He seemed anxious. He asked me if I had delivered the new manure mixture. "And what did you reply?" Poirot inquired. Finch rubbed his forehead. "I told him yes, that the delivery arrived late the prior evening. I warned him to check its seal. It seemed damp. He frowned, fetched a sample, and tasted a pinch, then spat it onto the soil. He said it had a bitter metallic tang." Poirot's moustache twitched. "And did he dispose of the rest?" Finch nodded. "Yes, he ordered me to remove the remaining sacks from the shed and lock them away. But later, when I returned, those sacks were gone." "Gone?" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Whom did you see carry them out?" Finch looked down. "No one. They simply vanished overnight." Mrs. Smythe leaned forward. "I discovered the empty shed the next morning and reported it to Lady Eleanor. I feared someone removed the manure to prevent further damage, but by then Sir Reginald was already missing." Poirot rose. "A curious sequence. Contaminated manure delivered. Sir Reginald detects something amiss. Manure sacks disappear, and then the master vanishes. The key questions: who supplied that manure, and who removed it? Both acts indicate inside knowledge of the garden's workings." He turned to Lady Aldridge. "Madame, who arranged for the manure's purchase?" She frowned. "Sir Reginald ordered it from Ashley and Cohort, a reputable firm in London. I have his invoice here." She produced a folded sheet from her desk. Poirot examined it. The order was for 200 weight of organic nitrogen mix, advanced formula, delivered to the shed on the previous evening. He refolded the invoice. "Ashley and Cohort will have records of the purchase and the delivery. I shall dispatch a telegram to their manager." Mrs. Smythe rose. "Shall I accompany you to the walled garden, monsieur? You may see what I mean by sterile soil, and perhaps uncover clues Mr. Byron missed." "Excellent idea," Poirot agreed. He looked to Finch. "And Mr. Finch, once your strength returns, I would value your guidance through the rosebed. Your knowledge of each rose variety and its habits might reveal anomalies." Finch bowed his head. "I would be honoured, monsieur." Lady Aldridge moved to the window. "Shall we go at once? The morning mist might lift, giving clearer view." Poirot nodded. "Yes, but first I would like to ask one more question. Mrs. Smythe, has anyone shown unusual interest in the garden of late? Visitors, family friends, or workmen beyond the usual staff?" Mrs. Smythe considered. "Now that you mention it, the gardener's apprentice, young Timothy Ward, has been spending extra hours here. Always eager, he asked permission to try new grafting techniques. Sir Reginald seemed pleased until the spoiled manure arrived." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Timothy Ward, please fetch him for questioning when he arrives later today. For now, let us proceed to the garden." They gathered their coats and umbrellas and departed the library, emerging into the damp grey morning. The walled garden's moss-grown walls enclosed a spectacle of decay. Collapsed trellis, dusty soil, and rosebush skeletons. Mrs. Smythe led Poirot to the edge of the central bed. "See, monsieur," she said, sweeping a pale hand across the soil. "Not a single green shoot remains. Even the hardistier varieties, Crimson Empress, Ivory Queen, lay barren." Poirot crouched, examining the earth closely. He scooped a small fistful, letting the soil sift through his fingers. He sniffed, then touched a finger to his tongue and tasted faint bitterness. Indeed, arsenical taint. He set aside the soil and stood. "Now, where is the shed?" Mrs. Smythe pointed through an iron gate. They passed a small whitewashed building, its door hanging slightly ajar. Inside lay empty hooks and a single overturned wheelbarrow. Poirot crossed the threshold, eyeing footprints in the sandy floor, one set small and neat, another broader, and muddled by rain tracked in from outside. "Two sets of prints," he murmured. "These smaller ones belong to the apprentice, perhaps, the larger to someone else, an adult visitor." He knelt, measuring the prints. Remarkably fresh. Someone entered here after the rain began this morning. Poirot dusted his glove across the floor, capturing a faint trace of boot print pattern. He rose, eyes shining with resolve. "Madame, Mrs. Smythe, we have direction at last. The garden's ruin and Sir Reginald's disappearance are linked in these prints, and in that corrupted manure. I shall question young Ward and send inquiries to London. By evening we may know whom to hold responsible, and with luck, where Sir Reginald has been taken." Lady Aldridge exhaled, relief mingled with dread. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. May your deductions bring my husband safely home." He bowed gravely. "I give you my solemn assurance, madam, that I will uncover every secret this garden conceals." With that promise echoing against the manor's stone walls, Hercule Poirot set about unravelling the tangled roots of Thornwick's darkest mystery. Chapter 3. The Apprentice's Alibi. A pale sun fought its way through heavy clouds as Poirot and Lady Aldridge made their way back from the walled garden toward the manor. The chill in the air matched the urgency in Poirot's stride. Behind them, Mrs. Smythe closed the shed door and dusted her gloved hands on her skirt. They descended the gravel path to the entrance hall, where Timothy Ward, the gardener's apprentice waited with a pale, anxious expression. Mr. Finch hovered nearby, leaning on the footman for support. Monsieur Poirot paused, studying the young man with those inscrutable grey eyes. Timothy was in his early 20s, tall and lean, with straw-blonde hair that escaped a neat cap. His vest bore smudges of earth, and his trousers were frayed at the cuffs, evidence of long days spent among hedges and rose arches. "Timothy Ward," Poirot began, his voice calm but insistent. "I have observed your footprints within the shed. You entered here after the rain began this morning." He tapped the sole of one boot. "Explain, please." The apprentice swallowed, shifting his weight. "Sir Reginald asked me to fetch the wheelbarrow," he said softly. "It was leaking, and he wanted fresh soil brought in. I did not know the manure was gone. I found the shed empty, so I returned to the house." Lady Aldridge frowned. "He did ask you, Monsieur Poirot, but at dawn. The rain began later. Whom did you see here when the ground was wet?" Timothy's eyes flickered. "No one, Lady Aldridge. I left as soon as I saw the sacks were missing." Poirot raised a gloved hand. "Yet these prints show a second set of heavier boots, prints that match neither mine nor Colonel Fitzroy's." He turned them toward the larger footprint. "Have you recently seen any stranger on the grounds? Perhaps someone arriving by carriage or on foot?" The apprentice hesitated. "There was someone late yesterday afternoon." He looked at Mrs. Smythe, whose lips tightened. "A man came to the gate. He asked for Lady Aldridge, but would not give his name. He said he had urgent business with Sir Reginald, but when he learned Sir Reginald was in the walled garden, he climbed over the wall rather than ring the bell." Mrs. Smythe gasped. "He scaled the ivy. I saw him from the greenhouse window. Tall fellow, dark coat, brimmed hat pulled low." Poirot's eyes brightened. "And did anyone confront him?" "No one," Timothy said. "The man entered the garden and was gone by the time I arrived at 6. He swallowed. "That would explain the heavy prints." "Très bien," Poirot said. "Madame, this visitor may hold the key. We must learn his identity and purpose. Have the gatekeeper search the registers for any name that speaks of recent callers. And I shall examine the torn ivy where he climbed." Lady Aldridge nodded. "I will attend to it immediately." She dismissed the Chioujour, apprentice and Mrs. Smythe, with gentle courtesy. As they departed down the corridor, Poirot turned to the footman. "Show me the area of ivy scaling, if you please." Half an hour later, Poirot stood beneath the western wall of the walled garden, accompanied by the footman and the stable boy, who had witnessed Mrs. Smythe's observation. The wall rose 2 stories high, its weathered stones overlain with wild ivy. A narrow band of torn vines, torn leaves still green, marked the spot where the stranger must have climbed. Poirot knelt and pressed a gloved fingertip against the torn bark. "Notice the direction of the tear, downward toward the left." He traced the jagged edge. This fellow was left-handed. He glanced up at the ivory sky. Most men climb with their dominant hand. Our suspect used his left. A small but telling detail. He examined the stone ledge above. A faint smudge of dark leather marred the surface. He pressed a finger, revealing a slightly sticky residue, perhaps tar or pitch from a soaked hatband. He sniffed gently. Pitch from a waterproofed garment. This visitor travelled in wet weather and took pains not to reach the garden by gate. He stood and surveyed the wall's top edge, where a coping stone jutted slightly. He leapt down here, Poirot observed, then trod across the rose bed to the shed. The prints confirm that. Our next task, to find any overlooked fibres or traces he left behind. He drew a magnifying glass from his waistcoat and scanned the rose foliage. Among the brittle stems, a bright thread of green embroidery caught his eye. A fragment of fabric that did not match the garden staff's uniforms. He plucked it with tweezers and examined it. Silk, embroidered with a vine motif, part of a scarf or a woman's glove, perhaps. Poirot pocketed the sample and rose. Inform the footman to search the greenhouses and drawing room for any missing scarves or gloves matching this pattern. Our suspect may have dropped it in haste. The footman bowed and hurried away. Poirot retraced his steps toward the garden's entrance, mind already forming possibilities. In the kitchen, Lady Aldridge pored over the gardener's logbook with the gatekeeper. Poirot joined them silently, but she greeted him with urgency. I found a note in the visitor register. No name, but a ciphered address. Ex Alder. It seems deliberate. Poirot leaned over the book. Ex Alder. He tapped the X. An anonymous alias, perhaps referencing Aldridge. He sought Sir Reginald's attention without revealing his identity. Lady Aldridge shivered. What sort of man would do that? That we shall soon discover, Poirot said. We must examine the cipher to learn his identity and cross-reference any known acquaintances. But first, I wish to question Mr. Finch in more detail, once his health returns, to pinpoint the exact moment the manure sacks disappeared. Lady Aldridge nodded. He is resting now. Would you like me to fetch him? Not yet, Poirot said. Let us gather all our clues first. He placed the register aside and fingered the green thread in his pocket. Silk embroidery, left-handed climber, pitch residue, and a mysterious alias. He turned to her. Madame, will you join me in the herb garden? I wish to examine that soil sample from the vegetable plot and compare it to the rose bed. Lady Aldridge followed him through the manor's back corridors, into the smaller herb garden, a tidy square of thyme, sage, and rosemary. The air here was fragrant and lively, a stark contrast to the ruined walled garden. Poirot knelt by the vegetable plot, where cabbages and lettuces still thrived. He took a small shovel and scooped fresh earth into his hand. The soil was dark and rich, yielding easily. He rubbed it between his fingers. No trace of arsenic here, and no metallic taint. He set aside the soil in a small porcelain dish he carried. Then he repeated the process by the rosebed's edge. This, in contrast, is dry, powdery, and contains the bitter traces we found yesterday. He fetched a small vial from his pocket and transferred a sample of each into separate containers. 2 distinct zones, one alive, one poisoned. The assassin's act was targeted, the walled garden alone. He rose, brushing his hands on his trousers. Now, I shall send these samples to London for chemical analysis. Meanwhile, we have identification through footprints and fabric. Our left-handed visitor is either known to Sir Reginald or deliberately hides in plain sight. Lady Aldridge looked around the fragrant beds. I feel uneasy among these living plants, when just beyond is ruin. Poirot offered her a reassuring smile. Madame, we are closer to the truth than ever. When the London analysis confirms the toxins, and when we decipher X Alder, we shall name our suspect. Then, with a little more legwork, you will be reunited with your husband, and this garden shall bloom anew. Back at the manor, they passed clusters of gardeners carrying buckets of compost for the greenhouses. Mrs. Smythe paused to glance. At them, her brow furrowed. Poirot caught her eye and nodded encouragingly. She returned a determined look, as if steeling herself for the work ahead. In the drawing-room, Poirot took his place at a small mahogany desk. By lamplight he wrote in his notebook, "Poisoned manure targeted rosebed, arsenic plus unknown salt. Left-handed intruder scaled wall, pitch residue on hat or coat, green silk embroidery fragment, likely dropped at shed. Visitor signed alias X. Alder in register on soil samples from vegetable plot clean." He tapped his pen. Much to ponder. He looked up as Lady Aldridge entered with a cup of tea. "Any progress?" she asked. "Promising," Poirot said, sipping the tea. "The footprints and fabric point to our suspect's profile, and tomorrow's chemical report will confirm motive in the soil. Now, we must turn our attention to X. Alder. I shall decipher the cipher and inform the gatekeeper to check any mail or correspondence arriving under similar aliases." She nodded. "I shall see to it." As she departed, Poirot settled into his armchair, little grey cells whirring. Outside, a distant peal of thunder heralded an approaching storm. Within Thornwick Manor, the calm before the tempest would soon give way to revelation, and he hoped to Sir Reginald's safe return. The soil's secrets were being laid bare, and with each clue, Poirot drew closer to solving the affair of the withered garden. Chapter 4. The Cipher Unveiled. The following morning dawned bright and cold, the garden's skeletal vines etched sharply against a pale blue sky. Inside Thornwick Manor, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation, as Hercule Poirot awaited confirmation of his next clue. He sat in the oak-panelled study, little grey cells abuzz, when the footman appeared with an urgent note. "Monsieur Poirot," the footman said, "this telegram arrived from London, addressed in the cipher X. Alder. It reads, 'Lab results. Soil salt is copper sulfate. Meet me in private.' Signed W.B." Poirot's eyes narrowed with satisfaction. He handed the telegram to Lady Aldridge, who had just entered with a tray of fresh tea. "Copper sulfate," he murmured, "a potent fungicide commonly used in vineyards, but deadly to roses. Someone acquired it deliberately to kill your garden." Lady Aldridge swallowed. "But who is W.B., and why entrust the cipher X. Alder with him?" Poirot rose, smoothing his waistcoat. W.B. must be Mr. Byron, the horticultural expert. He collected the soil samples, then fled. Now he contacts us, and yet still withholds his full identity. We must see him at once. He tucked the telegram into his pocket and turned to Lady Aldridge. "Madame, will you summon Mr. Byron here, and ask Mr. Finch to join us? His recovery should allow him to stand." "Right away," she said, departing into the corridor. Poirot poured tea and leaned back, contemplating the significance of copper sulfate. Our gardener's illness may also have been deliberate. Trace amounts caused nausea and weakness. Mr. Finch's fever was no accident. Moments later, Lady Aldridge returned with Mr. Byron, a gaunt man in his 40s whose spectacles were perched precariously on a thin nose. Behind him followed Mr. Finch, still pale, and Mrs. Smythe, whose eyes were wary. "Monsieur Poirot," Byron said, bowing carefully. "You wished to see me?" Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, Mr. Byron. You sent word of the copper sulphate finding. Why did you leave so precipitously?" Byron swallowed. "I feared for my safety. When I detected arsenic and copper sulphate, I realized someone knew of my analysis. They might have thought I would expose them." He glanced at Lady Aldridge. "I did not wish to alarm Madame." "And yet you alarmed her more by vanishing," Poirot replied gently. "Nevertheless, your courage in contacting us proves your intent to aid. Now tell us how you identified the compound." Byron held up a slender vial of soil residue. "I performed a standard reagent test for copper ions. The soil turned deep blue when treated with ammonia, unmistakable for copper sulphate. Alone, arsenic and copper sulphate would devastate the garden and weaken those who inhaled the dust." Poirot nodded. "Thank you. Now, to the cipher X Alder. You addressed your telegram under that alias. Why?" Byron's gaze flickered. "I thought it prudent to protect your names. I fancied X, Alder, an amusing nod to this estate, Thornwick Aldridge." He forced a wry smile. "Foolish, perhaps." Poirot tapped his fingertips together. "Not foolish, but unnecessary. Now that we know your identity, we may dispense with subterfuge. Yet your choice hints that you distrusted some household member, fearing they might intercept your message." Byron nodded. "Yes, Mr. Ward's account of a stranger scaling the wall convinced me the saboteur might belong to the household." Poirot turned to Mr. Finch. "Mr. Finch, when you tasted the manure, you detected a metallic tang. Did you notice any crystals or unusual colour?" Finch rubbed his temple. "Yes, tiny blue-green granules among the soil. I thought initially they were fertilizer pellets, but they dissolved into that bitter slime. Copper sulphate crystals," Poirot confirmed. "Now, I shall require a full sample of those granules for further analysis." He accepted a small vial from Byron. Lady Aldridge cleared her throat. "Monsieur Poirot, are we any closer to Sir Reginald?" He smiled reassuringly. "Closer indeed. We have motive. Someone wished to destroy the garden and punish its master. We know how. Copper sulphate and arsenic. We know the saboteur entered clandestinely, likely left-handed, and even carried a fragment of green silk." He produced the fragment. Mrs. Smythe and Finch leaned forward. Mrs. Smythe gasped. "It matches the glove I found in the greenhouse, the one belonging to Sir Reginald's cousin, Julian Aldridge. He visited yesterday morning." Lady Aldridge's face went pale. "Julian was here indeed. He claimed concern over the garden's state, but I dismissed him, thinking his interest purely familial." Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "Cousin Julian, then, arrived under the guise of kinship, but may have exploited that trust to carry out his plot. His gloves would explain our green silk thread." Byron's eyes widened. "Julian? But why would he harm the garden? He stands to inherit if Reginald dies without issue." Poirot nodded gravely. "Inheritance is a powerful motive. By destroying the garden, and endangering the master, Julian might hope to compel Sir Reginald's capitulation, or worse, remove him entirely. Lady Aldridge drew in a shaky breath. Then we must confront Julian immediately. Poirot raised a gloved hand. Patience. We need proof beyond the silk thread and a hunch. First, let us visit the gatekeeper's lodge. The visitor register should show any record of Julian's arrival. He turned to the footman. Bring the register, and the cipher key for X-Alder. We shall decipher any hidden messages. The footman bowed and vanished. Byron and Finch exchanged anxious glances. Moments later, the footman returned with a thick ledger. Poirot opened it to the previous day's entries. Here, X-Alder appears at 3:15 p.m. The cipher key reveals that X stands for Julia. Each letter offset by 2 in the alphabet. A simple substitution. Lady Aldridge gasped. So X, Alder decodes to Julian Alder. Poirot smiled. Precisely. Our saboteur signed his alias as an anagram of his own name, perhaps as a taunt. Now, I have enough to confront him, if he dare deny it. At that moment, the door opened to admit a prim footman with a card on a silver salver. The footman announced, Sir Julian Aldridge. In stepped Julian. Tall, distinguished, his dark hair streaked with grey. He wore a tailored overcoat and carried himself with polite dignity. His eyes flicked with mild surprise upon seeing Byron and Finch. Lady Aldridge rose. Julian, your presence is fortuitous. Poirot stood and bowed. Sir Julian, I trust you have slept well. Julian inclined his head. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I have concerns about this wretched garden, but I would never harm my cousin. Poirot regarded him coolly. Yet copper sulphate and arsenic tell another story. Your gloves match the silk fragment found in the shed, and your alias X, Alder, decodes directly to your name. He paused, letting the weight of proof settle. Answers, please. Julian's composure faltered. He glanced at Lady Aldridge, whose face was drawn with grief. He turned back to Poirot. This is accusation, without context. Yes, I attended yesterday, but only to plead with Reginald to sell the estate. He refused, and I left in frustration. Poirot stepped closer. But you acquired copper sulphate from Ashley and Cohort under your own name, on the same invoice for the fertilizer. Our telegram from London confirms your purchase. He produced the invoice. Here, Sir Julian Aldridge, 2 pounds of copper sulphate delivered to Thornwick Manor. Julian's shoulders slumped. He gazed at the floor, silent. Poirot addressed the assembled staff. Fetch the manor seller's ledger, and the voucher for Ashley and Cohort. Let us confirm the purchase date. Lady Aldridge gave the order, and the footman hurried off. Julian sank into a chair, head in hands. I thought if I destroyed Reginald's cherished garden, he would be so stricken that he'd agree to sell. I never meant him harm, only to scare him into reason. Poirot's gaze softened slightly. Fear can be a brutal teacher, yet you also plotted to vanish him through arsenic exposure, and you conspired in alias and stealth. Julian wiped his brows. I didn't poison him personally. I only sprinkled copper sulphate on the soil. The arsenic, I hired a third party to add it. I lost control of events. At that moment, the footman returned with the cellar ledger and voucher. Poirot compared the dates. Julian's purchase of copper sulphate on the day before the garden's ruin, and a separate entry for £20 of arsenic listed under a false name. Confirmation complete, Poirot closed the ledger. Sir Julian, you are accomplice to attempted murder and garden sabotage. I shall inform the local magistrate at once. Lady Aldridge covered her mouth, tears spilling. My cousin! Julian looked up, eyes hollow. I only wanted the estate, never to hurt Reginald so grievously. Poirot inclined his head. Justice must follow, but you will also have your chance for redemption in court. As the footman escorted Julian from the room, Byron stepped forward. Monsieur Poirot, what of Sir Reginald's disappearance? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, that remains unresolved. But we have unmasked the saboteur. Now we turn to Sir Reginald's fate, likely tied to the same conspiracy. Lady Aldridge gripped Poirot's arm. Then we must find him, quickly. Poirot smiled with resolute calm. Indeed, madam. We chase new clues, while the soil's secret lies uncovered. The greatest mystery of this affair remains. The missing master of Thornwick Manor. And with that, Hercule Poirot strode into the corridor, determined to complete the circle. From a poisoned garden to a vanished husband, he would leave no stone unturned and no blossom unbidden, until the truth was revealed. Chapter 5. A Trail. Through the Thorns. The sun hung low in the autumn sky as Hercule Poirot and Lady Aldridge gathered in the entrance hall, preparing to pursue fresh leads on Sir Reginald's disappearance. The revelation of Sir Julian's guilt had sent a shockwave through Thornwick Manor, but Poirot knew that unmasking the saboteurs was only half the battle. Now, the vanished master of the estate awaited discovery. Madame, Poirot said, straightening his waistcoat, we must consider Sir Reginald's likely movements. He vanished from the walled garden at dawn 5 days ago. His riding coat remained on the peg and his horse was found in the stable, saddled but unattended. He could only have gone on foot, or perforce been taken elsewhere. Lady Aldridge nodded, her expression grim. He always walked the north path through the avenue of beeches toward Blackwater Dell. It is his favourite place for quiet reflection. Then that is our starting point, Poirot decided. Mr. Finch, my dear fellow, are you well enough to guide us to that path? Mr. Finch, seated in an armchair by the hearth, allowed Dr. Grant to help him to his feet. The gardener rubbed his wrists as he stood, pale but determined. Yes, monsieur, I will do my best. And so, with Mrs. Smythe carrying a small satchel of provisions and Colonel Fitzroy offering support where needed, the party set out. Lady Aldridge, Poirot, Mr. Finch, and Colonel Fitzroy, leaving Mrs. Smythe and Dr. Grant to tend the household affairs. They emerged into the chill afternoon, the grounds of Thornwick Manor, silent beneath rustling beeches. The north path curved away from the house, its mossy stones slippery with fallen leaves. Finch led, his steps cautious but sure, until they reached the edge of the walled garden fence, where Sir Reginald had vanished. Here, Finch whispered, pointing to a narrow gap in the undergrowth. He must have crawled through these brambles. I found broken twigs and scuffed earth when I returned. Poirot knelt, examining the disturbed leaves. He picked up a crushed fragment of green silk. smaller than the piece from the shed. "A further trace of our saboteur's cousin," he murmured, "but also a clue to Sir Reginald's exit." They pressed on, passing under the arching boughs of the beeches. Soon the path narrowed to a deer track, winding toward a small clearing beside a bubbling spring. Colonel Fitzroy stopped at its edge. "Sir Reginald came here often to fill his flask," he said, "but this spring was dry for 2 days before his disappearance. Hence the drought in the garden, I suspect." Poirot examined the stones around the spring. He found footprints, distinctly shoe prints, narrow and pointed, smaller than the average man's. He measured the sole's width with a slender rule. "Size 6, he announced. "Lady Aldridge, whose footwear matches that size?" Lady Aldridge thought for a moment. "My lady's maid, Mrs. Pender, wears such shoes." She paled. "But she has served me faithfully for years." "Faithful indeed," Poirot said gently. "Yet anyone can be drawn into another's scheme." He turned to Finch. "Did you note Mrs. Pender's movements around the garden on the morning of the disappearance?" Finch frowned. She brought Sir Reginald his coffee at dawn, but she lingered by the greenhouse rather than joining him in the walled garden. She said she feared he'd catch cold. "Choose excuses carefully," Poirot murmured as they followed the path into the dell. The beech trees gave way to brambles and tall sedges beside the stream. A lone heron lifted from the water's edge with a startled croak. The path became muddier here, footsteps wetter, and darker soil poking through the peat. "Reginald would never stray far from the stream," Finch said. "He liked to watch the trout dart among the rocks." They rounded a bend and found a muddy bank with fresh shoe prints, the same narrow size 6 impressions, and beside them the wide-booted prints of Sir Julian's riding boots. The prints led off the path toward a thicket. Poirot followed them, brushing aside brambles until they reached a small glade where the ground was churned and broken. A fallen log lay across a shallow pit, its earth freshly disturbed. Colonel Fitzroy knelt to inspect. "It looks as though something heavy was buried here," he said, thrusting a hand into the pit and withdrawing dark, damp soil. Poirot crouched and scraped some earth beside the heron tracks. Hidden among the roots lay a scrap of pale linen, torn from a cuff, perhaps the edge of Sir Reginald's shirt. "Good," Poirot breathed. "He passed this way, no doubt dragged here." He stood and turned to Finch. "The pit suggests forced removal, but Sir Reginald must still be alive if moved swiftly." Lady Aldridge's voice trembled. "What can we do?" Poirot considered. "We must trace the direction of those tracks from the glade. The prints will lead us to wherever he was taken." He followed the boot prints, Julian's and the maid's, side by side, winding through the brambles, then converging on a narrow service track that led uphill, away from the stream. Within minutes they reached a dilapidated ice house, a circular, stone structure half subterranean, its iron door rusted but ajar. An icy draught curled from within. Colonel Fitzroy pressed a lantern beam inside. Trenches of frost crept across the walls, but inside lay a wooden crate topped with fresh straw. Poirot's moustache quivered. "Enter with caution," he instructed. Colonel Fitzroy lifted the lantern higher, revealing Sir Reginald's riding boots and the edge of a coat draped across the crate. When Colonel Fitzroy pulled back the coat, they found Sir Reginald himself, slumped but conscious, his face pale but unmarked. Lady Aldridge rushed forward. "Reginald, oh, thank God!" She knelt by him, pressing his hand. "What happened?" He blinked, disoriented. "They—" He gestured feebly toward the door. "Julian and Pender. They drugged me in the spring water, said it would keep me calm while they buried me. But then they got frightened when Mr. Byron tested the soil." He closed his eyes, shivering. Poirot knelt beside him. "You must rest, sir. We will take you back to the manor at once." He turned to Colonel Fitzroy. "Help him to his feet." The Colonel and Lady Aldridge supported Sir Reginald as Mrs. Smythe appeared with clean cloaks. Together they carried him from the ice-house. Poirot paused at its threshold, eyeing the spot. "The final piece of this puzzle," he murmured, "was to remove Sir Reginald until the garden lay in ruin, hoping his disappearance would be permanent." He closed the iron door. But the little grey cells never rest. Moments later, they emerged into the fading light. Sir Reginald leaned on Colonel Fitzroy, supported by Lady Aldridge's gentle arm. The withered beeches whispered above them as they made their way back to Thornwick Manor. Inside the great hall, Dr. Grant met them with a warm shawl and cups of restorative broth. She knelt beside Sir Reginald, checking his pulse and breathing. Lady Aldridge embraced her husband, tears mingling with relief. Poirot observed his face serene, yet his mind still turning. When Sir Reginald was settled in a chair by the hearth, Poirot addressed the assembled group. Lady Aldridge, Colonel Fitzroy, Mrs. Smythe, Finch, and Dr. Grant. "Our task is complete. The saboteurs apprehended, the victim found alive, and the garden's secrets laid bare. But before the dawn, we must ensure wounds are healed and justice is served." He turned to Lady Aldridge. "Madame, you have your husband back. The walled garden may yet bloom again under your care." She laid a grateful hand on his arm. "You have given me everything, Monsieur Poirot." He inclined his head. "It is the gardener's work that transforms seed to blossom. I merely pointed the way." Outside, the wind rustled through the bare beeches. Within Thornwick Manor, hearts were lighter, and gardens, once withered by malice, would soon be restored by compassion, truth, and the resolute craft of the little. Grey Cells. Chapter 6. The Night of Reckoning. A restless wind rattled the leaded windows of Thornwick Manor as dusk settled across the estate like a silken pall. Inside the drawing-room, the flicker of candles danced upon crimson curtains and gleamed off polished mahogany. Hercule Poirot paced before the hearth, the little grey cells turning over the revelations of the day. Sir Julian's confession of sabotage, the narrow escape of Sir Reginald from the ice-house, and now the urgent necessity of confronting Lady Pender. For her hand, too, had been laid upon the bitter salts of betrayal. Lady Eleanor Aldridge sat on a velvet settee beside the fireplace, her composure strained but resolute. Mrs. Smythe and Colonel Fitzroy stood behind her, while Dr. Grant hovered near the tea-table ready with balm and bolster. Mr. Finch rested in an armchair, the colour slowly returning to his cheeks as strength mended in his limbs. Yet the final piece of the puzzle, the faithful maid-turned-accomplice, remained unrevealed. Poirot stopped and faced Lady Aldridge. "Madame, until we hear from Lady's maid Pender herself, the circle of suspicion will remain incomplete. I propose we summon her now, in the presence of us all. Let her speak her truth." Lady Aldridge rose, smoothing her gown. "Yes, I will send for her at once." She tapped a silver bell. The footman appeared. "Ask Mrs. Pender to join us in the drawing-room without delay. If she hesitates, inform her I insist." The footman bowed and hurried away. Within moments the door opened to admit Mrs. Pender, pale but upright, her hands clasped before her. Her uniform was immaculate, yet a tremor lay in her eyes. She curtsied to the gathering. "Monsieur Poirot, madame," she said, voice quavering. "You wished to see me?" "Madame Ponder," Poirot began gently, "you have stood by your mistress these many years. Yet evidence points to your involvement in Sir Reginald's disappearance. We have traced left-handed footprints to the Ears ice house, and we found a size 6 shoe print that matches your shoes. We have copper sulphate in the garden, arsenic in the soil, and, most telling, your gloves green silk in the shed. You must now explain yourself." Mrs. Pender closed her eyes and swallowed. "Monsieur, I never meant him harm. Her voice broke in a sob. "Please forgive me." Poirot inclined his head kindly. "Speak freely, madame. Why did you assist Sir Julian in his plot?" She lifted her tear-stained face to Lady Aldridge. "Madam, I have served this family loyally since I was a girl. I loved Sir Reginald as if he were my own kin, but when I learned, through overheard whispers, that Sir Julian stood to inherit everything should your husband perish or depart utterly, I feared the ruin of this household. I thought, if I aided Julian, he would owe me a debt of gratitude, and I could ensure Sir Reginald's safety in his power." Dr. Grant gasped softly. "You endangered him to protect him." Mrs. Pender bowed her head. "I convinced myself that Julian's plan was only to scare Sir Reginald, to shock him into sale, and that I, as Julian's conspirator, could intervene before matters turned grim. I helped sprinkle copper sulphate among the rose roots. I fetched the arsenic when asked. I held back Mrs. Smythe's questions. But when the night came and Julian led my master to the ice house, I could not bear to watch. I left him there, ashamed, and ran to the greenhouses to hide." Poirot waited, allowing her confession to settle. "Madame, your motives were twisted, rooted in fear and misplaced devotion. But the end does not justify the means. You compromised every life here." She nodded, tears flowing freely. "I know. I shall accept whatever comes." Lady Aldridge regarded her with sorrow softened by gratitude. "Pender, you misjudged us. Your loyalty blinded you to the true danger, Julian's opportunism. It is I who misled you by withholding my knowledge of Julian's threats. For that, I must apologize." Mrs. Pender looked up in surprise. "Madame?" Lady Aldridge stepped forward. "I suspected Julian's involvement early on, but I hesitated to burden you with my fears. In doing so, I deprived you of duty's clear path. I misled you more than even Sir Julian did." Mrs. Pender's face crumpled. "Madame, Lady Aldridge reached out. "You have repented, but now we must face the consequences together." Poirot nodded. "Madame Ponder, your truth has completed the circle. Sir Julian and you conspired in garden sabotage and in your master's concealment. But the law must take its course, though I will do all I can to speak on your behalf." Mrs. Pender bowed her head once more. "Thank you, monsieur. Thank you, madam." Colonel Fitzroy unclasped his sword belt. "I shall inform the constable at once. Then we shall restore Thornwick's peace. With Mrs. Pender escorted away by the footman, the remaining company dispersed to ready for the morrow's reckoning. Yet before she left, Mrs. Pender paused at the door and turned back to Lady Aldridge. "I pray, madam," she said softly, "that Sir Reginald may forgive me." Lady Aldridge stepped forward and embraced her. "In time, dear Pender, in time." When the door closed, Poirot surveyed the emptied room. "Madame," he said to Lady Aldridge, "we have unmasked every hand that conspired against this garden and its master. Tomorrow we shall face Sir Julian in court, and then Thornwick may begin to heal." Lady Aldridge wiped her eyes and smiled wanly. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I could not have endured this without you." Poirot dipped his head. "It is my privilege. Now, rest, for dawn's work will require our full strength." The candles guttered in the hush, and Thornwick Manor's walls seemed to exhale, knowing that betrayal had been revealed, and that, with the morning, justice would bloom once more. Chapter 7. Flowers of Forgiveness. Crisp dawn broke over Thornwick Manor, gilding the last amber leaves of autumn with a promise of renewal. Inside the entrance hall, servants moved quietly, preparing the drawing-room for the day's most delicate ceremony, the formal charge against Sir Julian Aldridge, and the absolution, where possible, of those whose hearts had strayed. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the room, little grey cells poised to guide each step, as a muted procession entered. Sir Reginald Aldridge, supported by Dr. Grant, Lady Eleanor, resolute, Colonel Fitzroy in morning coat and sash, and Mrs. Smythe and Mr. Finch, both bearing the weight of recent events. Lady Pender, summoned from the local constabulary's temporary quarters, arrived in a simple dress, her face drawn but dignified. Sir Julian, his expression humbled beneath rumpled cravat, stood before a small deputation from the magistrate's office. The air was thick with expectation, and a hint of frost that seeped through the high windows. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice calm and authoritative, "today we unite two solemn duties, to deliver justice upon the guilty and mercy to the repentant." He gestured toward Sir Julian. "Sir Julian Aldridge, you stand accused of wilful sabotage of the walled garden, conspiracy to remove your cousin, and intent to extort this estate. Do you acknowledge these charges?" Sir Julian bowed his head. "I do, Monsieur Poirot. Confess my guilt, and I accept whatever punishment is just." Poirot inclined his head. "Your contrition is noted. I shall present the evidence. Then we shall determine your fate." He turned to Colonel Fitzroy. "Colonel, you witnessed the discovery of Sir Reginald in the ice-house. Will you recount the circumstances?" The Colonel spoke clearly. How he and Poirot had traced footprints to the ice-house, found Sir Reginald half buried and weakened by exposure, and then raised the alarm. The magistrate's clerk recorded every detail. When the Colonel finished, Poirot nodded and turned to Dr. Grant. "Doctor, please describe Sir Reginald's condition upon rescue and the effects of the toxins used." Dr. Grant, composed in white linen and a soft blue shawl, spoke of copper, sulfate's corrosive damage to the roses, and arsenic's insidious effect on human physiology. Nausea, fever, delirium. She confirmed that Sir Reginald's recovery had been possible only through immediate removal from the contaminated soil and careful care. So, Poirot summarized, the evidence proves both motive, inheritance, and method, the deliberate tainting of soil and water to drive Sir Reginald from his mind and body. Now, I call upon those present to speak of character. He turned first to Lady Pender. Mrs. Pender trembled but stood firm. "I aided Sir Julian," she said, voice quavering, "believing I protected Thornwick's future. I was wrong. I beg forgiveness of my lady and of Sir Reginald." Lady Eleanor stepped forward, extending her hand. "Pender, your confession was brave. I forgive you." A soft murmur of relief passed through the room. Poirot allowed the moment before addressing Mrs. Smythe and Mr. Finch. Both attested to the intense loyalty they felt toward their mistress and master, and to their horror upon learning their unwitting part in the plot. Poirot turned lastly to Sir Julian. "Your crime was grievous, yet you confessed freely." He paused, then continued, "In the name of justice tempered by compassion, I propose the following. Sir Julian, you shall be detained until the assizes convene, where verdict and sentence shall be determined under the law. Meanwhile, you will make restitution to the gardens you destroyed, under Mrs. Smythe's supervision." Sir Julian's shoulders sagged with acceptance. "I will restore every rosebush I destroyed, and more." Poirot nodded. "Very good. And now, Sir Reginald, will you deliver closure to this assembly?" Sir Reginald rose unsteadily, supported by Dr. Grant's arm. His voice, though still soft from convalescence, carried strength. "Today I stand before you whole again, thanks to Hercule Poirot, Lady Eleanor, and all who showed courage in truth. To my cousin Julian, may your restitution bring you humility and a renewed heart, and to Thornwick's gardens I pledge to tend them with fresh compassion, that they bloom once more as a testament to forgiveness." As he finished, a hush fell. Lady Eleanor offered him a hand, and he accepted it with a grateful smile. Poirot surveyed the group. "Then let us proceed to the walled garden." At his signal, the assembly moved through the great hall and into the crisp air beyond. In the walled garden, the skeletal rose bushes stood silent, their trunks blackened by copper salts and frost. Mrs. Smythe directed Sir Julian to kneel beside a scarred bed of once proud crimson empress roses. In her hands she held new saplings, vibrant, root-bound, ready for planting. "Here, Sir Julian," Mrs. Smythe said, "plant this rose in place of the one you killed." He took the sapling with reverence, lowered it into the thawing earth, and packed soil gently around its roots. Each movement was solemn, an act of penance. Then he rose and crouched beside another bed, continuing until each broken stump was replaced by a young shoot. Meanwhile, Sir Reginald and Lady Eleanor knelt together, placing rose cuttings in a separate bed, proof that they, too, would nurture the garden's future. Colonel Fitzroy and Mr. Finch distributed fresh compost to the vegetable plot, restoring hope to the tender lettuces and kale. Even little Henderson, the stable boy, joined, spreading mulch beside the path. At last, the new roses glistened in neat rows. Poirot stepped forward and raised his hands to address them. "Let this garden stand as a symbol that no betrayal is too deep for forgiveness, no wound too grave for healing. In every blossom, we see the triumph of compassion over malice. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh earth and budding growth. Sir Reginald placed his hand on Poirot's shoulder. "Thank you, Hercule." Poirot bowed. "It was Madame's courage and everyone's goodwill that made this possible." Lady Eleanor stood and surveyed the transformed garden. "Come, my love," she said to Sir Reginald, "let us walk among the roses once more." As the couple and their friends strolled the paths, the early tremors of winter fled before the warm promise of spring. In the heart of Thornwick Manor, where withered roses once lay barren, new life and new trust had taken root, and under the watchful eye of Hercule Poirot, justice had blossomed into something far more enduring, the quiet glory of forgiveness cultivated by human hands. Chapter 8. Spring's First Promise. 6 weeks later, Thornwick Manor awoke to the soft flush of spring. The once barren walled garden now shimmered with tender green shoots, and the newly planted crimson empress roses stood proud in their orderly rows. A gentle breeze carried the scent of new blossoms, and the orchestra of songbirds heralded a season of renewal. In the drawing-room, Lady Eleanor Aldridge adjusted her gown of pale rose silk, turning to survey the assembled guests with a radiant smile. Today was the formal garden fête, an event designed both to celebrate the restored beauty of the walled garden and to mark Sir Julian's restitution. The invite list included the household staff, local dignitaries, horticultural experts from Ashley and cohort, and several close friends: Dr. Eleanor Grant, Colonel Fitzroy, Mr. Byron, Miss Violet, Carstairs, Mr. Finch, and young Timothy Ward. At precisely 4 o'clock, they would gather for a ribbon-cutting ceremony beneath the rose arbour. In the glass-walled conservatory, Poirot took tea with Mr. Byron. The horticultural consultant, once the harried expert who fled Thornwick in fear, now brimmed with enthusiasm as he admired delicate orchid blooms and newly arrived magnolia saplings. "Monsieur Poirot," Byron said, swirling his tea, "I cannot recall a more gratifying project. To see copper sulfate's corrosion replaced by bona fide nourishment. It warms the heart." Poirot smiled, his moustache quivering. "The miracle lies not in soil science alone, but in the human capacity for redemption. Yesterday's villains, the saboteur and the misguided accomplice, have given way to diligent stewards." He gestured at a white bench draped with ivy. "Do you recall the ice-house incident?" Byron nodded gravely. "Indeed, I owe my life, at least my reputation, to your intervention, monsieur. I misjudged the power at Thornwick." Poirot inclined his head. "And now you have helped its revival. But our fate awaits. Shall we step into the garden?" In the walled garden, Lady Eleanor stood beside Colonel Fitzroy, her husband Sir Reginald at her side. Both wore simple morning coats. Sir Reginald's eyes shone with gratitude. A quivering hush fell as Dr. Grant stepped forward with the ribbon, a length of pale green silk embroidered with rose motifs, the same colour as the fateful gloves. Lady Eleanor took the scissors from Violet, who held them in a small velvet cushion. "Friends and neighbours," she began, voice ringing with warmth. "Today we celebrate not only the bloom of gardens, but the triumph of forgiveness. Let this ribbon symbolize our promise to tend both soil and souls with care." With a swift snip, the ribbon parted. A cheer rose as guests strolled beneath the arbour, admiring early buds of Ivory Queen and Golden Dawn. Nearby, Mr. Finch knelt to plant a final rose, his hands steady and sure. Timothy Ward hovered with fresh water buckets, delighting in his renewed role. As the party dispersed, Colonel Fitzroy led a small tour to the vegetable plot. Broad beans climbed slender poles, and lettuces gleamed emerald. "We must not neglect the orchard," he said to Sir Reginald and Lady Eleanor. "Next month we will host cider pressing, another sign of bounty restored." Sir Reginald smiled. "Your ideas exceed mine, Fitzroy. Our reprieve from winter's chill owes much to your foresight." "Not mine alone, sir," Colonel Fitzroy replied with a laugh, "but teamwork." A little apart, Lady Eleanor and Poirot strolled along the straight walk. The sun warmed their backs as they passed beds of periwinkle and primroses. "Madame," Poirot said, "how do you feel now that the garden has truly come alive?" Lady Eleanor paused, resting a hand on an arching trellis. A swirl of pink blossoms shivered in the breeze. "I feel hopeful, monsieur. For so long this garden mirrored my fear, lifeless, poisoned. Now every green tendril reminds me that suffering can yield renewal." She turned to him. "Your guidance has been my lodestar." Poirot bowed slightly. "It was never my doing, alone. The goodwill of every hand, that of your gardeners, your friends, even of Sir Julian in his contrition, has nourished Thornwick back to life." By the old fountain, once bone dry, Dr. Grant held court with Violet Carstairs and Mr. Finch. She passed around small sprigs of mint and lavender, urging guests to sniff and compare. Violet sketched the scene, capturing Dr. Grant's gentle smile and Finch's robust health. "I find the medicinal garden invaluable," Dr. Grant said, inhaling deeply. "These plants will form a vital resource for the villagers when we open a monthly clinic." Violet set aside her sketchbook. "And I shall design blankets and cushions from the flax grown here, a creative endeavour to match your healing work." Mr. Finch tipped his hat. "I'll ensure the greenhouse supplies the seeds. Thornwick will be renowned for comfort as well as beauty." A nearer group gathered around Mrs. Smythe and Sir Julian, who knelt beside a bed of leet-chrising jasmine, a tribute to the household staff, both loyal and penitent. Sir Julian, his court appearance postponed to allow him time to fulfil his horticultural restitution, offered Mrs. Smythe a pair of heavy gardening gloves. "For all your tireless work and your forgiveness," he said, his voice earnest. Mrs. Smythe brushed a tear from her cheek. "Thank you, Sir Julian. May these gloves remind you that toil and care can redeem the deepest wounds." Sir Julian rose, his posture humbled but sincere. "I shall wear them each dawn when I begin my penance." As the late afternoon sun tapered to gold, the gathering drifted to the manor's terrace, where Lady Eleanor had arranged a spread of sweetmeats, finger sandwiches, and elderflower and lavender cordials. The staff served with hushed efficiency, allowing guests to mingle comfortably. Poirot sidled to Lady Eleanor's side, a slice of lemon tart in hand. "Madame, the fete has exceeded even my best hopes." She offered him a ribbon-wrapped posy of snowdrops. "And this," she said, "is for you, a symbol of our gratitude." Poirot accepted the flowers with a flourish. "I am moved, madam, but the sweetest reward is seeing your joy, and that of Sir Reginald." He glanced at her husband, now deep in animated conversation with Colonel Fitzroy. "May this harmony endure." Lady Eleanor's eyes glistened. "With your blessing, Hercule, I know it will." As dusk fell and lanterns were lit along the garden paths, guests began to depart. Tucked inside cloaks against the evening's chill, Sir Reginald and Lady Eleanor escorted them to waiting carriages, offering warm farewells. Then all turned to the master and mistress of Thornwick Manor, and to their beloved detective. Each raised a glass of mulled wine in salute, toasting to new life, to forgiveness, and to the enduring promise of spring. With one final bow, Poirot stepped back into the conservatory, the lantern light flickering on his polished boots. Outside, the rose arbour glowed in the lantern-lit dusk, a testament to cycles of ending and beginning, to the power of choice, and to the gentle hand that guides a garden back to bloom. As he closed the conservatory door, Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. In the heart of Thornwick Manor, where withered plants had once whispered of despair, spring's first promise now shone, and with it the unbreakable bond between human hearts and the earth that sustains them. Chapter 9. Whispers in the greenhouse. Soft mist curled through the glass panes of the Thornwick Manor greenhouse, as dawn's pale light filtered through the dew. Inside, the air was thick with warmth and the heavy scent of blooming orchids and jasmine. Verdant vines climbed trellises, and rows of potted ferns unfurled their fronds like greeting hands. This was a world apart from the walled gardens. Proud roses, here a lush sanctuary where even the most delicate seedlings might thrive. Hercule Poirot entered, his cane tapping rhythmically against the brick floor. His keen eyes glinted as he surveyed the scene. Mrs. Smythe tending a row of camellias, Mr. Finch checking soil moisture at a long workbench, and Timothy Ward arranging new trays of seedlings under a misting nozzle. Each moved with purpose. The echoes of past betrayals long dissolved into loyal toil. Poirot's entrance drew their attention. "Monsieur," Mrs. Smythe called, setting aside her pruning shears, "is something amiss?" Poirot shook his head, stepping between two large banana palms. "Not at all, madam. I come seeking quiet reflection, and perhaps a small conundrum." He smiled, his moustache twitching. For what Victorian garden is complete without a mystery to match its splendour? Mr. Finch laughed softly. "If you have another puzzle, sir, we shall be glad to help, though I hope it involves only misplaced trowels, not poison." Poirot inclined his head. "Fear not, my friend. Today's question concerns a quiet visitor seen in the greenhouse at odd hours, one who neither tends plants nor carries seeds, yet whose footsteps have stirred the young ferns." He paused, letting the words settle. "I refer to Lady Pender." At the name, the three gardeners exchanged wary glances. Mrs. Smythe's lips pressed thin. Mr. Finch set down his trowel. Timothy Ward's face paled behind his table of seedlings. "Lady Pender?" Timothy whispered. "She's not been seen much since July." Poirot nodded. "Precisely. Yet last evening I received word from the footman of her presence. Here after sundown, slipping through the service door, carrying a small satchel. He tapped his temple. I suspect she came searching for something in the soil. Mrs. Smythe drew a breath. She asked me for white foam, hydrogen peroxide, to treat a fungal rot on her husband's favourite orchids. I gave it to her, but I did not see her use it. Poirot's eyes shone. Orchids, a curious choice. If one sought to harm or heal, white spores might hide in that foam. He turned to Finch. And you? Did you notice her footprints? Jer frowned. They were small, ladies' shoes size 6, but muddied with the dark loam from the fern cases, not from the walled garden's clay. He pressed his foot to demonstrate. She must have gone directly from the house to the greenhouse, rather than through the garden. Indeed. Poirot stepped closer to a bench of young orchids. And if she sought more than fungal cure, perhaps a chance to plant something new. He paused, picking up a small folded scrap of paper lodged between the orchid pots. The Tio's handwriting was shaky but familiar. Find truth where roots intertwine. Ik-E-A. He handed it to Mrs. Smythe. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the note. E.A. Eleanor Aldridge. But why would she instruct herself? Poirot smiled gently. A private code, perhaps, to remind her of a promise. He slipped the note into his waistcoat pocket. Madame Pender came seeking clarity, no doubt, though whether for consolation or confession is yet to be determined. Timothy Ward swallowed. Sir, I saw her slip behind those potted palms just after dark. She knelt, and both hands sifted soil beneath the orchids. When she rose, she held something small, dark, like a seed capsule. Poirot's moustache twitched. A seed capsule, perhaps a rare specimen she wished to plant in her own garden, or a vessel of secrets. He turned to Mrs. Smythe. Retrieve your satchel and the remaining hydrogen peroxide. She hurried to fetch her nurse's bag from a shelf. From it she withdrew a small bottle. Poirot uncapped it and dipped a finger in. The liquid was clear, but a faint blue haze clung to the rim. He sniffed it. Silver nitrate, he muttered. Not hydrogen peroxide, but a mercurial disinfectant once used to sterilize wounds. Finch raised his eyebrows. Mercurial compounds are toxic, especially to delicate roots. Precisely. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Lady Pender came here under the pretext of treating orchid rot, but she intended to apply silver nitrate to the orchid roots, perhaps to purify soil of an unwanted element. Yet silver nitrate also darkens organic matter, marking it, and, with repeated use, can kill fragile plants. He looked at Mrs. Smythe. Why would she wish to poison Lady Eleanor's orchids? Mrs. Smythe shook her head. I do not know, unless she sought to avenge her own misdeeds. She confessed her part in Sir Julian's plot and remained under confinement. Perhaps she wished to atone, or to destroy symbols of Lady Eleanor's triumph. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Atonement through destruction. A paradox indeed. He turned to Timothy. Show me where she knelt. The apprentice led Poirot and the others to a row of orchids whose leaves bore dark brown streaks, and faint silver powder dusted beneath their pots. Poirot knelt and scooped a small sample. He pressed his fingertip to the powder and tasted carefully, then coughed softly. Evidently she tested the plant's tolerance before committing further. He rose abruptly. We must find her at once. If she continues this practice, more botanical treasures will perish, or worse, poison those who tend them. He scanned the greenhouse exit, where Twilight seeped through the doors. Mrs. Smythe, lock the service doors. Mr. Finch, fetch Lady Pender here. Timothy, accompany me to her chambers. Gather what you may of her notes and implements. They dispersed, moving with efficient purpose, through the humid aisles. Poirot paused by a mass of maidenhair ferns, each blade quivering in the humid warmth, and whispered, "Even in paradise, thorns conceal themselves." He glanced upward as Mrs. Smythe returned, key in hand, glancing around the greenhouse like a sentinel. Within the hour, Lady Pender was brought in, her face pale beneath the glass reflections. Mr. Finch stood beside her, holding a small satchel of botanical implements. Lady Eleanor and Sir Reginald followed, concern in their eyes. Poirot stepped forward. "Mrs. Pender, you have confessed your part in the great garden betrayal, yet you remain a servant of this house. Now your hands are stained with silver nitrate, the cloak of repentance seeking purification through destruction. Explain yourself." Mrs. Pender's shoulders sagged. "Monsieur Poirot, I came to atone. I thought if I could destroy Lady Eleanor's prized orchids, I would balance the scales, punish her indirectly for my sins. Then I would reveal myself and confess, hoping that shared loss would bind us once more." Lady Eleanor's eyes brimmed. "Shared loss?" Mrs. Pender nodded. "Yes, if I confessed amid ruins, we would both suffer and perhaps forgive each other." She looked at Sir Reginald. "I never meant harm to you." Poirot observed each face. "Your atonement is misguided. Compassion grows where forgiveness takes root, not in the ashes of destruction." He turned to Lady Eleanor. "Madam, would you allow Mrs. Pender to redeem her loyalty through service rather than sabotage?" Lady Eleanor placed her hand on Mrs. Pender's arm. "Your remorse is clear. I forgive you for all you have done." She turned to Poirot. "May she remain as my maid, under probation, and serve our household honestly." Poirot smiled. "A sensible remedy. Mrs. Pender, you will tend the greenhouse under Mrs. Smythe's direction, learning the value of life you would have destroyed. Your penance will be in daily care, not secret vengeance." Mrs. Pender bowed, tears of relief streaming. "Thank you, madame." She turned to Mrs. Smythe. "Teach me, please. I will learn." Mrs. Smythe nodded, her stern lines softening. "Come, we begin tomorrow." Poirot stepped back. "Thus we have wrestled betrayal from the soil, first from heir and maid alike, and Didet replanted seeds of trust through confession and mercy. Thornwick's gardens, like its hearts, have proven resilient." He turned to Lady Eleanor and Sir Reginald. "May your orchids now flourish, free of poison, and may every bloom remind you that forgiveness is the rarest flower of all." Outside, the greenhouse glow faded into the evening, its glass panes reflecting the promise of spring and the unbroken circle of redemption that clasped Thornwick Manor in its gentle embrace. Chapter 10. The Final Bloom. A soft haze of morning mist curled over Thornwick Manor as the household gathered once more in the refurbished walled garden. Today marked the culmination of months of toil and redemption. The grand horticultural fete, open to villagers and invited guests alike. Beneath the newly arching rose pergola, Lady Eleanor Aldridge paced with purposeful grace, adjusting the pale rose ribbons that fluttered between columns of crimson empress blooms. Sir Reginald, now fully recovered, stood at her side, his face alight with pride and gentle relief. Hercule Poirot arrived a moment later, stepping from a waiting hansom with his usual impeccable poise. Colonel Fitzroy and Dr. Grant were already in their places, while Mr. Byron inspected a display of rare magnolias and tiger lilies. Mrs. Smythe, no longer simply the head gardener, but now Thornwick's chief curator of living collections, oversaw the final arrangements of potted ferns beneath the glass-house veranda. Even Mrs. Pender, wearing a crisp new uniform and a modest corsage of freesias, circulated trays of tea and lilac-infused biscuits. Poirot greeted them with a small nod. "Mes amis, what a splendid sight! The garden's recovery surpasses all expectations." He paused, taking in the riot of pastel blossoms, clipped boxwood borders, and the gleam of polished brass plaques bearing plant identifications. Today, Thornwick stands as testament to human contrition and nature's capacity to forgive. Lady Eleanor stepped forward, her gown of dove-grey silk picking up the morning's softness. "Hercule, I cannot thank you enough. Without your guidance, Thornwick's legacy would have wilted under malice and despair." She turned to the assembled staff and guests. "But today is not only about us. We open our gates to the community. For the first time, this garden welcomes those beyond these walls." Applause rippled through the group as the villagers began to arrive. Schoolchildren clutching pressed lavender sprigs, elderly patrons with wicker baskets, and local dignitaries bearing garlands of spring flowers. Colonel Fitzroy and Dr. Grant conducted them through guided tours. The rose beds, the herb garden, the vegetable plots. Mr. Byron offered expert commentary on soil health, while Violet Carstairs, seated at a small harp, filled the air with gentle melodies. Poirot wandered the paths like a delighted guest, stopping now and then to admire particular blooms or exchange pleasantries. At one point he encountered Timothy Ward and Mr. Finch kneeling side by side, replacing a few frost-bitten begonias with fresh sprigs of bouvardia. He nodded approvingly. "Messieurs, you have shown remarkable dedication. The garden thrives under your care." They stood and returned his salute, cheeks flushed with exertion and pride. Even a few of the children paused their chase of ladybugs to wave at the detective, their faces beaming in the dappled light. As the morning progressed, Lady Eleanor gathered her family at the central fountain, now restored to its graceful cascade. She lifted a small wreath of white lilies and placed it upon the fountain's rim. "By taking root in forgiveness," she declared, "we have revived not only these gardens, but our hearts." She handed the wreath to Sir Reginald, who followed suit. A hush fell as the wreath floated downstream, carried in gentle circles by crystalline water. Poirot stepped forward, clearing his throat. "If I may," he began, "I propose that Thornwick's next chapter be one of sharing these gifts. Let this garden become a centre for horticultural education, where townsfolk learn the art of cultivation and children discover their own seeds of wonder." Lady Eleanor's eyes glowed. "What a marvellous idea! Colonel Dr. Grant, your thoughts?" Colonel Fitzroy saluted. "A Thornwick school of horticulture would benefit many and, Ensure the estate's prosperity for generations. Dr. Grant nodded. And we could incorporate lessons in herbal medicine, helping villagers care for their own health. Mr. Byron, overhearing, added, I would be honoured to serve as visiting lecturer. With unanimous enthusiasm, the plan was set in motion. Weekly classes, seasonal workshops, summer camps for local children. The fete continued in high spirits, with laughter echoing among the hedgerows, and visitors clutching seed packets carrying Thornwick's emblem. By midday, tables groaned under the weight of strawberry tarts, elderflower keels, and delicate tea sandwiches. Lady Pender, ever transformed, moved among the guests, offering refills and soft smiles of invitation. Poirot found her near a stand of sweet pea vines. Madam Pender, he said gently, how do you feel now that Thornwick's gardens extend beyond these walls? She paused, her eyes reflecting gratitude. Monsieur Poirot, I feel humble and hopeful. To serve something greater than myself in full honesty, I never imagined such peace. Poirot placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Your penance has borne fruit, both here and within your own soul. She inclined her head, gazing at the climbing roses. Thank you for granting me mercy, so I might learn compassion. At the fountain's edge, Sir Reginald and Lady Eleanor waited to greet Poirot, offering him a sprig of lavender in thanks. He accepted it with a flourish, tucking it into his lapel. Madame, monsieur, he said, my gratitude knows no bounds. The garden's final bloom is that of restored trust between all of us. They shook hands, and the three strolled together along a shaded walk. Birds flitted overhead, and hidden in corners, tender green shoots, a promise of roses yet to come, broke gently through the soil. It is time, Monsieur Poirot, Lady Eleanor said softly. Your duties here are fulfilled. Will you allow us the honour of your next case's report? He bowed, tapping his cane. My honour indeed, madam. And as for Thornwick, whenever your roses call for counsel, or your hearts for comfort, I shall return without hesitation. Sir Reginald offered his arm. Then now, let us provide you a proper luncheon indoors. The spring sun calls for fresh salads and a good vintage. The gates of Thornwick Manor swung open one last time to welcome Poirot and the visiting party back into the manor's warmth. Violet Carstairs' harp tinkled a bright farewell, and Colonel Fitzroy escorted the detective to his waiting cab. As the wheels rolled over the gravel drive, Poirot looked back at the receding spires of the walled garden. The crimson empress. Roses glowed like embers against the sky. Proof that even from the deepest betrayal, beauty can blossom again. Leaning back in his seat, Poirot allowed himself a small, contented sigh. In the heart of Thornwick, he had witnessed true renewal, not only of roses and jasmine, but of friendship, loyalty, and the human spirit itself. And with that, Hercule Poirot, ever the traveller between mysteries, faded into the broader world, carrying, with him, the memory of Thornwick's final bloom, and the lesson that in every garden of the soul, forgiveness is the greatest seed of all. Chapter 11. The Fading Blossom Late. July brought a riot of colour to Thornwick Manor's walled garden. Crimson empress roses drifted in heavy heads, cascades of honeysuckle climbed the trellises, and pots of foxglove lined the paths in regal procession. Yet beneath this jubilation lay a curious disquiet. the solitary climbing rose at the far end of the north wall, known as Thornwick Pride, had begun to wither. Its buds, once pale gold, curled brown at the edges. Its leaves, once glossy, fell in shriveled seams. The first to discover the decline was Mr. Finch, who tended the roses each dawn. He found the first telltale leaves one morning, and summoned Mrs. Smythe at once. Together they examined the vine's slender stem, noting sun-scald along one side and faint powdery mildew at its base. But neither soil poisoning nor malicious pruning bore the hallmarks of silver nitrate or arsenic. This was a gentler, subtler blight, one that suggested nature rather than malice. Word of the fading rose reached Lady Eleanor and Sir Reginald. At their breakfast, they exchanged worried glances over silver teacups of mint tea. Sir Reginald tapped the china saucer thoughtfully. "It cannot be coincidence, Eleanor," he said softly. "Thornwick Pride survived every trial. Icehouse, sabotage frost, and yet now it falters." Lady Eleanor reached across the table to grasp his hand. "Perhaps it needs our help, not our worry. I will ask Mrs. Smythe to investigate." By 9 o'clock, the entire gardening staff, including Mrs. Pender, formerly maid and now greenhouse assistant, and Timothy Ward, apprentice, gathered around the afflicted rose. Mrs. Smythe knelt to inspect the root collar, her brow furrowed. "See here," she murmured. "The soil is dry beneath the surface, yet over-moist near the top. Dangerously uneven moisture can stress roots, inviting mildew above." Mr. Finch suggested a soil test. Timothy dug a small sample, which Mrs. Smythe sent by courier to Mr. Byron, now Thornwick's visiting horticultural adviser. By late afternoon, Byron returned with a report. The soil's pH had shifted slightly acidic, and a local strain of Erysife alphitoides, a rose mildew, had taken hold. Neither villain nor heroic act had caused this. It was simply a natural disease, exacerbated by the uneven watering system installed after the copper sulfate fiasco. While Byron and Mrs. Smythe conferred on treatment, applying a carefully measured mixture of neem oil and baking soda solution, Sir Reginald and Lady Eleanor reflected on the rose's symbolic meaning. "I named it Thornwick Pride to honour the manor's resilience," Sir Reginald said, gently touching a withered bud. "Yet pride can wilt under neglect." Lady Eleanor sighed. "We focused on grand gestures, replanting roses, rebuilding the garden school, but perhaps we overlooked this one vine." She reached to steady the climbing stem. "It demands our attention now." That evening Hercule Poirot arrived for his fortnightly visit. Though he had long since departed in pursuit of other mysteries, he had returned at Lady Eleanor's invitation to celebrate the garden's successes, and to lend his little grey cells to this new puzzle of the fading rose. He was shown at once to the walled garden, where Mrs. Smythe and Byron stood beside the arched Thornwick Pride trellis. "Mon ami," Lady Eleanor greeted him warmly, "we feared this rose beyond cure." Poirot studied the vine calmly. He knelt, feeling the soil's uneven dampness, and traced the drip lines from the newly installed irrigation pipes. He observed how the water nozzles, angled to avoid rust stains on the brass plaques, delivered sprays that missed the root zone by a hair's breadth, so that the surface layer soaked while deeper roots thirsted. He rose and addressed Byron. Monsieur, your treatment is correct, but the root cause lies in irrigation error. A rose demands even moisture to foster strong roots. I suggest adjusting the nozzle angles and introducing a simple mulch of wood chips to retain moisture by gradual release. Byron nodded enthusiastically. Ingenious Poirot, a familiar horticultural principle, yet in our zeal we overlooked it. He turned to Mrs. Smythe. See that Lady Eleanor's suggestion takes effect at once. Mrs. Smythe smiled. At once, monsieur. Poirot turned to Lady Eleanor. Your garden thrives on grand designs and small attentions alike. This rose reminds us that pride, like any living thing, requires nurturing in every measure. Lady Eleanor's eyes glistened in the lantern light. As always, Hercule, you expose both simplicity and depth. They watched as Byron and the gardeners realigned the nozzles, sprinkled wood chips around the rose's base, and gently misted its leaves with the neem solution. Over the next days, the crew monitored moisture levels carefully, shielding the blossom from direct afternoon sun until its leaves began to unfurl in bright green once more. 4 weeks passed, and the walled garden prepared for its autumnal display. The vegetables in the adjacent plots had yielded squash and pumpkins. Marigolds and asters draped the borders in vivid gold and purple. Yet the grandest moment awaited the morning when Thornwick Pride would show new shoots, a testament to resilience. That morning, a small gathering assembled at the north wall. Lady Eleanor, Sir Reginald, Mrs. Smythe, Mr. Finch, Timothy Ward, Byron, Dr. Grant, Colonel Fitzroy, Violet Carstairs, and, of course, Poirot. They approached the Golden Rose in reverent procession. Sir Reginald stood before the vine, now clinging with glossy leaves and several tentative buds. He reached to release the twine that had supported its fragile stems through treatment. Lady Eleanor held Lady Pender's hand, the former maid's loyalty shining in her eyes. Poirot, taking his place beside the couple, raised a gloved hand. Mes amis, witness the final bloom of Thornwick's pride, once withered by nature's whim, now restored by human care. He bowed to Byron. Your expertise saved the rose from quiet demise. Byron inclined his head. And your insight, monsieur, preserved our greatest symbol. Poirot motioned to Colonel Fitzroy. Colonel, might you declare its revived status? Colonel Fitzroy stepped forward, clearing his throat. Let it be known that on this day, the 22nd of August, the climbing rose known as Thornwick Pride has regained vigour through communal diligence, balanced cultivation, and unflagging care. He cut a single bud with silver shears, symbolic, harvest, and offered it to Lady Eleanor. She received it with a gentle smile, then handed it to Sir Reginald, who pinned it to her gown beside his own lapel flower. Dr. Grant lifted her water bottle. I propose a toast to perseverance and to the promise each new blossom carries. Glasses of elderflower cordial appeared, and they drank in a warm chorus of "Hear, hear." Violet Carstairs captured the moment at her sketch-pad. Poirot's proud stance, the gardener's relieved grins, and the rose framed in flourishing green. She made a final note beneath the drawing. Thornwick Pride resurrected, August 22nd, a lesson in balance, attention, and forgiveness. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Lady Eleanor and Sir Reginald strolled hand in hand along the Rose Promenade. The final Thornwick Pride bud glowed in the fading light, a quiet beacon of hope. Sir Reginald paused beneath the arch. "My love, this rose embodies our journey. Through hardship, betrayal, penance, and renewal." He kissed her hand. "May we always remember its lesson." Lady Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder. "And may our hearts remain as open to care as our garden's soil." They continued down the path, passing under the first gentle splashes of lantern light, while the last butterflies of summer drifted among marigolds. The air smelled of earth and possibility, as though the garden itself exhaled in contentment. Meanwhile, in the shadow of a yew tree, Poirot stood with Colonel Fitzroy. The colonel offered him a small journal. "An article for the village chronicle, monsieur," Colonel Fitzroy said, "on Thornwick Pride, a rose's revival. I thought you might wish to contribute." Poirot accepted the journal with a gracious bow. He thumbed through its empty pages. "An excellent idea, Colonel. A final reflection on this affair." He looked back at the garden in full bloom. "And now this humble detective must take leave. But I shall carry Thornwick's lesson wherever I roam, that in every soul's garden the smallest act of kindness may foster the grandest bloom." With that, Hercule Poirot clasped his cane and tipped his hat, turning towards the manor gates. The wind stirred Thornwick Pride, its golden petals trembling like a promise fulfilled, and in the soft twilight, the garden's final blossom stood in proud testament to resilience, compassion, and the enduring grace of a mystery solved. Chapter 12. Harvest of Hope. October's chill settled over Thornwick Manor like a silken cloak, painting the walled garden's brickwork in russet and gold. The crimson empress roses had shed their petals, leaving only a skeleton of graceful canes, while the vegetable plots offered their final gifts. Pumpkins the size of trenches, bundles of late kale, and fat beets crimson beneath their green crowns. Even the heady perfume of late jasmine had given way to the crisp scent of fallen leaves. In the greenhouse, Mrs. Smythe oversaw a last scattering of winter pansies, and Mr. Finch adjusted the hydroponic lights for tender seedlings destined for the spring classes. Across the lawn, Lady Eleanor Aldridge moved with brisk purpose, organising the day's harvest festival, an event at once festive and poignant, celebrating the season's bounty and Thornwick's journey from ruin to renewal. Hercule Poirot arrived just before sunrise, stepping from his waiting carriage onto the dewy gravel. He greeted the footman with a small bow and paused to admire the soft glow of lanterns strung among the pergolas, their light revealing the gentle tracery of bare branches above. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Eleanor greeted him warmly, her cheeks pink against the autumn air. She wore a cloak of deep maroon, fastened with a brooch of carved horn, a family heirloom. "I am delighted you have returned for our final fete of the year." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, I would not miss this occasion for the world. To witness Thornwick's full circle, from withered soil to gardens of instruction and delight, is a privilege." She smiled, leading him through the crisp air towards the greenhouse. Beyond its glass walls, guests gathered at tables festooned with gourds and chrysanthemums. Local farmers, village schoolchildren, and visitors from far afield, who had studied at Thornwick's horticultural workshops. Today's programme offered cider pressing, wreath-making from evergreen sprigs, and a lecture on soil conservation by Mr. Byron. All awaited the detective's appearance as guest of honour. "First," Lady Eleanor said, "let me introduce you to our new head instructor, Miss Violet Carstairs, now director of Thornwick's School of Botanical Illustration." Inside the greenhouse, Violet Carstairs stood beside an easel displaying watercolours of pumpkins and coneflowers. She curtsied to Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, your guidance inspired these lessons. I now teach 20 students weekly." Poirot studied her luminous eyes. "Madame Carstairs, your art brings plant life to heart and canvas alike." He paused before a palette of leaf studies. "Truly, the finest blooms are those rendered with love." As Violet beamed, Lady Eleanor signalled to Mr. Byron, who stepped forward with a small wooden mallet. "In Monsieur Poirot's honour," Byron announced, "we shall demonstrate the art of cider pressing." He tapped a barrel's head, and a crisp note echoed. The guests applauded, and the apple-laden press sprang to life. Outside, Colonel Fitzroy supervised a line of children shaking baskets of apples into a hopper, their faces bright as the fruit fell. Dr. Grant attended to warming cups of spiced cider, offering herbal sachets for cold relief. Even Mrs. Pender, now fully restored to trust and purpose, handed out seed packets from the autumn harvest, radish, spinach, and garlic for winter planting. Poirot wandered among the stations, offering gentle encouragement and biting into a small apple that burst sweet on his tongue. He paused by the wreath-making table, where autumn leaves, holly sprigs, and pine cones lay in neat stacks. Beside him, Timothy Ward tied a burlap ribbon around a half-finished wreath. "Timothy," Poirot said, "you have grown from apprentice to steward of Thornwick's legacy." He tapped the wreath. A fine composition, a crown for the garden itself. Timothy flushed with pride. "Thank you, monsieur. I meant it to represent the circle of seasons." "Just so," Poirot nodded. "Now, allow me to step aside for a moment." He crossed to a small stage beneath an arbour of grapevines, turning copper in the sunlight. There, he found Mr. Finch collecting his thoughts before presenting the benefits of cover crops for soil health. "Mr. Finch," Poirot said, "you too have journeyed from near ruin to rejuvenation. Your soil stewardship saved our springs from acid and our roses from blight." Finch bowed. "Monsieur, your intervention set us on the right path. I now teach these cover crop techniques to local farmers." Poirot's moustache twitched with approval. "A harvest of knowledge is perhaps the richest of all." By mid-morning, the cider had flowed, the wreaths adorned many doors, and the lecture hall, an open-sided marquee, filled for Mr. Byron's address. Lady Eleanor stepped onto the platform and tapped a silver bell. "Friends, neighbours, and esteemed guests," she began, voice clear. "Thornwick Manor opens its gardens and classrooms to all, so that our harvest, whether of apples or of understanding, may be shared." She motioned to Mr. Byron, who took the lectern to discuss soil pH, crop rotation, and the vital role of earthworms. Amid attentive nods and scribbled notes, Poirot observed the assembly. He recognized the schoolteacher who had led a book club under the rose arbour last summer, the blacksmith who had built garden gates under his own tutelage, and the elderly widow who insisted on planting her own window boxes through Thornwick's outreach. As Byron concluded to warm applause, Poirot rose to join him. He signalled for silence and took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, I stand before you not as crime-solver today, but as a thankful guest. For it is through your collective efforts, through confession, compassion, and cultivation, that this garden has become not merely a spectacle, but a living classroom and community cornerstone. You have proved that with care, any garden, human or horticultural, may flourish again. From the back, applause rippled through the crowd, hands raised in salute. Poirot bowed, then stepped down as Lady Eleanor joined him, her eyes bright with unshed tears of pride. By early afternoon, the guests drifted toward the orchard, where bronze cauldrons of stew and fresh loaves awaited, beneath long tables of autumn fruits, quinces, pears, late raspberries. The air hummed with conversation and laughter. Children ran between hay bales, their cheeks rosy from cider, while villagers traded tips on rose pruning and mulching. Reginald approached Poirot, offering a bowl of stew spiced with garden herbs. "Hercule, I cannot begin to repay all you have done. Thornwick stands as testament to your wisdom." Poirot accepted the bowl with a gracious nod. "The true reward is seeing this place thrive, and knowing that my work here is complete." He surveyed the garden now awash in late-season glory. "Yet remember, Sir Reginald, a garden cycle never ends. It is the eternal promise of renewal that gives hope." Sir Reginald chuckled. "Indeed, I shall need your counsel each season." Poirot puffed out a satisfied breath. "I shall hold a spare hour when spring calls." He paused, the little grey cells momentarily at rest. "But for now, allow me to enjoy your harvest." As twilight fell, the final event began. A lantern-lit procession through the walled garden. Along the main walk, strings of lanterns hung like stars among the trellises, casting a soft glow upon the trunks of climbing roses. Each guest carried a small glass jar with a lit candle, and Colonel Fitzroy led them in a quiet march to the old fountain. At the fountain's rim, they paused. Lady Eleanor stepped forward and spoke softly. "In the dark, a single light may guide us. Let each lantern symbolize the knowledge and kindness you carry into the world." She raised her jar, and a hush fell. Poirot, standing just behind her, watched as the congregation lifted their lights. Even Mrs. Pender, once agent of destruction, held her candle high, her eyes reflecting new purpose. "Now," Lady Eleanor whispered, "release your lights upon the water." One by one, the candle jars were placed in the fountain, drifting on circular currents, their flickering flames mirroring constellations long past. The effect was spellbinding. An illuminated sea of golden lights, each a testament to Thornwick's journey from withered soil to shared stewardship. Poirot inclined his head. "Madame," he said softly, "in every darkness knowledge and compassion shine brightest." She turned to him, a radiant glow from the lanterns dancing in her eyes. "Thank you, Hercule, for helping us cultivate this seed of hope." He smiled, his voice gentle. "It is Thornwick's own merit that gives light its meaning." He glanced at the floating candles, then at the gathered company, their faces uplifted in hopeful reverence. As the procession ended and guests drifted back to the manor under the lantern-lit trellises, Poirot allowed himself one final glance at Thornwick's transformed heart. The rose arches stood bare of petals, yet full of promise. The latticed vines, once poisoned, now twined new green growth, and at the centre the fountain continued its gentle flow. Drawing his shoulders around his coat, Poirot turned to walk away, yet he paused at the gate, looking back over the glowing garden. In that luminous moment he saw not only a solitude's end, but a community's dawn, a final harvest of hope culled from the soil of second chances. With a contented sigh, Hercule Poirot stepped into the evening mist, his cane tapping softly as he disappeared down the drive, leaving Thornwick Manor to the quiet music of crickets, lanterns, and the gentle promise of spring yet again. Chapter 13. The Farewell in Full Bloom. Late autumn sunlight slanted through the high windows of Thornwick Manor's drawing-room, as Lady Eleanor Aldridge surveyed the assembled company. The last of the Harvest Festival's guests had departed at dusk, leaving behind only the rich scent of cinnamon and wood smoke. Now, in the soft glow of the afternoon fire, she welcomed back Hercule Poirot, with her husband, Sir Reginald, at her side, and Colonel Fitzroy, Dr. Grant, Violet Carstairs, Mr. Byron, Mr. Finch, Timothy Ward, and Mrs. Smythe, arrayed around the hearth. "Welcome, mes amis," Lady Eleanor began, her voice gentle yet firm. "Our seasons together draw to a close, and I wish to offer you final thanks for your guidance, your labour, and your friendship." Poirot inclined his head, his little grey cells brimming with memories of withered blooms restored and hearts renewed. "Madam, it has been my greatest pleasure to witness Thornwick's transformation, from poisoned soil to sanctuary of learning and life. But please tell me, what remains upon the horizon for this beloved estate?" Sir Reginald stepped forward, clearing his throat with affectionate pride. "We have decided that Thornwick's Gardens shall live on as the Aldridge Garden Academy, under Mrs. Smythe's direction and Mr. Byron's advisement. This autumn's workshops will give way to a full semester of instruction beginning next spring. Lady Pender and Mr. Finch will lead the practical classes in greenhouse cultivation and soil science, while Miss Carstairs continues her botanical illustration series." A round of applause greeted the plan, a fitting reward for months of dedicated restitution. Lady Eleanor smiled, then raised her hand for silence. "Furthermore, Dr. Grant and Colonel Fitzroy will establish a quarterly clinic here, where villagers learn to harness the medicinal benefits of our herb garden. And, as I promised, the orchard will host cider-pressing festivals each harvest, offering fellowship across the county." Dr. Grant nodded, her eyes shining. "I look forward to teaching, and to treating any ailments from gardener's itch to heartbreak, with equal care." Colonel Fitzroy laughed. "And I shall serve as steward of the orchard, ensuring barrels stay full and spirits high." Poirot gripped his cane, his moustache quivering. Truly, Thornwick stands poised to flourish in every season. He surveyed each face in turn, seeing not merely colleagues, but companions in a shared journey. "Yet before I depart, I would propose one final tradition, a memorial rose to commemorate the garden's trials and triumphs." He tapped his cane thoughtfully. "Each year on this day, we shall plant a single rose in the walled garden, one whose bloom signifies renewal through adversity. Today, I have brought us a rare specimen, Rosa Phoenix Ascendant, famed for petals that open pale gold and fade to crimson at dusk." Lady Eleanor's eyes glistened. a perfect emblem. Let us plant it together." They moved through the crisp air to the walled garden, where the brisk breeze swirled dead leaves around empty trellises. At the centre stood a newly cleared bed, its soil rich and dark, tilled by Mr. Finch and Timothy. Byron carried the potted rose, its tight bud promising full glory. All assembled in a circle, lanterns in hand despite the afternoon light. Poirot held the spade. "Monsieur Finch, will you mark the spot?" Finch tapped the shovel into the soil. Then, at Poirot's nod, Lady Eleanor gently removed the rose from its pot, tending its roots with tender reverence. Sir Reginald placed the plant in the earth, and Colonel Fitzroy added the first handful of soil, pressing it gently around the stem. Dr. Grant laid a ring of chamomile seeds at the base, a token of soothing and growth. Violet tied a small ribbon of gold and crimson around the cane, depicting the rose's two-toned promise. Mrs. Smythe poured water from an antique copper kettle, and Mrs. Pender sprinkled a handful of compost, her hands steady and at peace. Poirot scooped the final earth with his compact garden trowel. Thus we release the Phoenix Ascendant into Thornwick's embrace. May its every spring bloom lift our hearts as ours have lifted this garden. They stood quietly for a moment, the only sound the soft drip of water and the distant cry of a jay. Then a gentle cheer rose as Sir Reginald and Lady Eleanor placed a silver plaque at the rose's foot, engraved Phoenix Ascendant Planted Oct. 30, 1927. In memory of loss, in celebration of renewal. Back in the drawing room, warm cider and honeyed cakes awaited them. The company settled around the hearth's glow, each reflecting on the year's journey. Mr. Byron sipped cider with contented satisfaction. Mr. Finch and Timothy exchanged tips on winter greenhouse chores. Dr. Grant offered herbal tonics for the coming cold. Colonel Fitzroy shared plans for next year's orchard expansion, and Violet displayed her final sketches of the season, the Harvest Festival's lantern-lit procession, and Thornwick Pride's autumn splendour. Lady Eleanor took Poirot's hand. "Hercule, you helped us plant more than roses. You planted trust. For that, our hearts are forever grateful." Poirot's eyes softened. "Madame, it was love of truth and of beauty that brought us here. But the truest beauty, I have come to learn, is the human spirit's capacity to forgive and to foster growth." Sir Reginald stood and raised his glass. "To Hercule Poirot, friend, guide, and forever welcome, at Thornwick Manor." They drained their cups in a hearty chorus. Outside, the lanterns flickered through the drawing-room windows, hinting at the promise of a bright tomorrow. Later that evening, as the household retired, Poirot slipped into the now empty walled garden, one final time. The Phoenix Ascendant stood in solitary splendour beneath the moon's silver glow, its petals sombre in the hush of night. He knelt, brushing a finger along a fallen leaf, and whispered, "Adieu, mon jardin. May your cycle of hope continue long after my cane has tapped elsewhere." He rose, one last glance at Thornwick's stone walls, entwined with climbing holly and ivy, and turned towards the great gates. The path beyond lay dark and misty, but Poirot's heart was alight with the knowledge that wherever he roamed, the lessons of Thornwick's trials and triumphs would accompany him, rooted deep like the greatest rose, yet reaching ever upward in pursuit of light. With that, Hercule Poirot, detective of both crime and the human heart, walked away from Thornwick Manor. His mission accomplished, the garden's final bloom safely planted in the rich soil of memory and hope. Chapter 14. Twilight's Gentle Farewell. The waning light of early November bathed Thornwick Manor in a burnished glow, gilding the last russet leaves that clung to the towering beeches. Inside the great hall, a final gathering awaited as the year's end approached. Lady Eleanor Aldridge, radiant in a sable-trimmed cloak, stood beneath the grand chandelier, pausing to let her gaze drift over the familiar faces of friends and colleagues. Sir Reginald leaned close, his hand warm upon her shoulder. Colonel Fitzroy, Dr. Grant, Violet Carstairs, Mr. Byron, Mrs. Smythe, Mr. Finch, Timothy Ward, and even the newly restored Mrs. Pender formed a circle of unity, each having played a part in Thornwick's remarkable journey. At the centre stood Hercule Poirot, his posture as impeccable as ever, his little grey cells aglow with satisfaction, yet tinged with wistfulness. Though winter's breath would soon hush the gardens into dormancy, the spirit of Thornwick thrived within these walls. Tonight they would toast not only the year's accomplishments, the flourishing academy, the enduring rose plantings, the shared harvests, but also bid farewell to the detective whose guidance had been their lodestar. Lady Eleanor stepped forward, lifting a crystal glass of spiced cider. The amber liquid caught the chandelier's light, casting warm reflections. On the polished floor, a hush fell. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, voice steady, "we are gathered to honour your service to Thornwick Manor. You arrived when hope seemed as withered as our roses, and through your wisdom our gardens found new life, our hearts learned forgiveness, and our community discovered purpose." She paused, emotion shining in her eyes. "You have sown seeds that will bloom for generations." Sir Reginald raised his own glass. "To Hercule Poirot, whose little grey cells proved mightier than any blight, mightier even than human malice." Glasses chimed in warm unanimity. Poirot inclined his head, moustache quivering. "Madame, monsieur," he replied, voice gentle. "Your words honour me beyond measure. But it is Thornwick's own spirit, your courage, your compassion, that turned poison into promise and despair into delight. I merely pointed where to plant and when to water." He took a measured sip, letting the cider's warmth settle. Then he set the glass aside and placed a small leather-bound journal on a side table. The cover bore a simple monogram, TGA, for Thornwick Garden Academy. "In this journal," Poirot explained, "I have recorded my observations, experiments and lessons from our time together. You may use it as you wish, to guide students, or to recall the turning points of this year." Violet Carstairs stepped forward to accept the gift, her fingers trembling with gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot, this is a treasure beyond words. I shall guard it and share its wisdom." Mrs. Smythe, tears brimming, clasped her wrist to her heart. "And I shall ensure every lesson on soil and seed you taught finds its way into Thornwick's curriculum." Colonel Fitzroy clapped the detective on the shoulder. "And I shall add a chapter on orchard stewardship, credited to you, of course." Poirot smiled, his heart light. "I am honoured. Now, one final request. If you will, may I walk once more through the walled garden, beneath the last rose arches of the season. Lady Eleanor nodded. Of course. The lanterns are lit. The paths await. They moved through the great doors into the crisp twilight, the hush of falling leaves underfoot. The walled garden's rose arches, now draped in winter twigs, led toward the heart where Phoenix Ascendant stood in solitary splendour, its two-toned petals a somersault of gold and crimson, even in November's repose. Poirot paused beside the rose, brushing a gloved hand along its slender stem. Look how it stands, undaunted by frost or flame. He turned to his companions. May each of you carry such steadfastness into the world. Sir Reginald and Lady Eleanor stood close, Colonel Fitzroy at their side. Dr. Grant and Violet, Carstairs formed the next row, with Mr. Byron and the gardening trio, Mrs. Smythe, Mr. Finch and Timothy just behind. Even Mrs. Pender hovered, shawl pulled tight, her eyes reflecting quiet hope. Poirot addressed them all, voice hushed as the falling dusk. Thornwick's true garden lies not solely in these walls, but in every heart transformed here. May your seeds of generosity, knowledge, and forgiveness spread beyond these stones, shading distant homes in goodwill. He paused, drawing a deep breath. And now, my friends, I must take my leave. I have another case that beckons, another garden of secrets to restore. But Thornwick shall always remain my cherished testament to what humanity can achieve when guided by truth and tenderness. A soft wind whispered through the rose arches, carrying the faint scent of last blooms. Lady Eleanor stepped forward, placing a wreath of autumn flowers in Poirot's hands. For your journey, she said, may this wreath remind you of Thornwick's embrace. He accepted it reverently. The flowers, golden, chrysanthemums, smoky lavender, and russet maple leaves, wove together in a pattern of seasons, loss, and renewal. Poirot tucked the wreath carefully into his coat, then turned one final time. Adieu, mes amis. May your gardens and your hearts ever flourish. With that, he began to walk away, each step measured, his cane echoing on the stone path. At the garden gate, he paused, tipping his hat in a last salute. His silhouette, framed by the arches and the deep purple sky, seemed to blend with Thornwick's enduring spirit. Then, softly as he had entered their lives, Hercule Poirot vanished into the night, leaving behind a garden reborn, a community united, and the promise that even the most delicate blossom can withstand frost, so long as it is tended with care. Chapter 15. Spring's Resounding. Call nearly 6 months had passed since Hercule Poirot's graceful departure from Thornwick Manor, and the first blush of spring had long since returned to its storied gardens, where frost had once curled the petals of crimson empress, now swayed a fragrant profusion of buds. The Phoenix Ascendant rose, planted in late October's dusk, unfurled its jewel-toned blooms in brilliant gold and scarlet. New shoots trailed across the pergolas, and the walled garden no longer echoed tales of sabotage and strife, but rang with laughter, lectures, and the soft hum of bees at work. On a bright but crisp morning in late April, Lady Eleanor Aldridge stood at the arched gate of the walled garden, greeting a fresh cohort of students. Under her gentle guidance, the Thornwick Garden Academy had blossomed into a respected institution, an open-air classroom where villagers and visitors alike came to learn soil science from Mr. Finch. botanical illustration from Miss Violet Carstairs, orchard management from Colonel Fitzroy, and herbal medicine from Dr. Grant. Lady Pender, now head of greenhouse operations, oversaw propagation and seed distribution, ensuring every seedling had the chance to flourish. Among the new arrivals stood Timothy Ward, no longer an apprentice, but one of Thornwick's rostered instructors. He offered a warm smile to Lady Eleanor as she handed out neatly printed schedules. "Good morning, madam," he said. "Shall we begin by inspecting the soil beds for our pH readings?" "As you wish, Timothy," Lady Eleanor replied. The lecture on the effects of calcium carbonate follows. But first, let us marvel at our garden's renewed vigour. They passed beneath the rose pergola, its overhead vines an emerald canopy. Beneath them, the earthen paths were free of last autumn's mulch, replaced with fresh straw laid neatly by Mr. Byron and Mrs. Smythe. Potted hellebores nodded to the east breeze, and the scent of jasmine drifted through the air. In every corner, evidence of human care and nature's resilience entwined in harmonious concert. Meanwhile, in the conservatory, Dr. Eleanor Grant demonstrated the proper distillation of lavender oil to a group of eager participants. She poured steaming water over fresh lavender sprigs, guiding steady hands through the process. A gentle mist clouded the glass panes as the first drops of essential oil collected in the receiving flask. "Remember," Dr. Grant instructed, "the strength of your infusion depends on both temperature and duration. Too long, and the oil gains bitterness. Too short, and the fragrance will lack depth." She smiled as a student inhaled the vapour, eyes lighting. "And now, for the final step, we collect our oil and preserve it in dark glass bottles to maintain its potency." Applause rippled as the students secured their first bottles of lavender essence. Behind them, Violet Carstairs sketched the distillation apparatus, her pencil strokes as delicate as the flower petals themselves. At the same hour, Sir Reginald and Colonel Fitzroy stood beneath the young apple trees in the orchard, pruning shears in hand. The trees had grown robust limbs since that first cider pressing the previous autumn, and the new growth promised an even greater bounty. "See, Reginald," Colonel Fitzroy said, cutting away a crossing branch. "By training these trees along horizontal trellis wires, we maximize sunlight exposure and ease of harvest." He demonstrated a careful cut at the right angle to encourage outward growth. "Always prune just above a bud facing the direction you wish the new limb to grow." Sir Reginald followed suit, clipping away a straggling shoot. "I never imagined I'd find such pleasure in horticulture," he admitted. "Yet each careful snip feels like a brushstroke on a living canvas." "Indeed," Fitzroy agreed. "And soon we shall open the orchard for our spring visitations, tea beneath the blossoms, and a workshop on grafting techniques." Sir Reginald looked across the rows, his face alight with anticipation. "I look forward to sharing it with our neighbours." Back in the walled garden, Lady Eleanor and Timothy arrived at the soil testing station, where Mr. Finch had prepared pH strips and moisture meters. He explained how to interpret a strip's colour change and how to adjust soil acidity through lime or sulphur applications. "Remember," Finch said thoughtfully, "the soil is the foundation for all we do. Just as Sir Reginald built his trust on steady support, we build these beds on balanced pH and structure." Timothy nodded, dipping a strip into a moist sample. "We owe much to your diligence, Finch. Granny's garden next door never ran so. True, Finch smiled. Then it is good our method spread beyond Thornwick's walls. By midday, the Academy's marquee stood ready for a demonstration by Mr. Byron on composting techniques. He displayed bins of layered greens and browns, explaining the carbon-nitrogen ratio required for heat generation and pathogen suppression. A good compost heap, Byron said, stirring the mix with a pitchfork, reaches temperatures over 60 degrees Celsius, hot enough to kill weed seeds, yet safe for beneficial microbes. Let it rest for 3 months, then sift for crumbly humus. A farmer in the front row leaned forward. I'll be taking notes. My fields could use this. Byron beamed. And in time, your fields will thank you. As the sun dipped toward the western trellises, honey-coloured light filtered through the rose pergola once more. Lady Eleanor met Hercule Poirot at the garden gate, his solitary figure stepping from a late-morning carriage ornamented with fresh spring flowers. Monsieur Poirot, Lady Eleanor greeted him, her smile as warm as the spring sun. We're delighted you could return for the spring semester opening. Poirot bowed, his cane tapping fondly on the path. Madame, no invitation could be refused. Thornwick's revival is the crown jewel of my efforts this past year. They gescheit. Strolled along the main walk, the balustraded walls clothed in vine and blossom. The air was alive with fragrance, daffodils, primroses, and early tulips nodding to the breeze. At the centre fountain, Sir Reginald and Colonel Fitzroy awaited them, with a small party of Academy graduates, each clutching certificates sealed with the Thornwick crest. Violet Carstairs stood to one side, ribbons of pastel streamers in hand. Lady Eleanor stepped to the lectern beside the fountain. Friends, a year ago this ground lay barren, poisoned by betrayal and neglect. Today we stand upon fertile soil, nurtured by knowledge, compassion, and community. It is my honour to present the first graduates of the Thornwick Garden Academy. As she spoke, she handed each graduate a certificate and a small rose sapling to plant in their own gardens. Applause followed, and the graduates scattered to place their saplings at the fountain's foot, encircling the phoenix ascendant rose. Poirot watched the tableau, contentment shining in his eyes. Mes amis, he said, turning to Lady Eleanor, you have planted hope both here and beyond. May each sapling grow strong, reminding your students of Thornwick's example. Lady Eleanor's gaze followed him with gratitude. Hercule, you shall always be our guide. As twilight settled and lanterns gleamed to welcome evening's gathering, the Academy closed its first chapter in academia. The guests gathered for a final toast in the drawing-room, where spiced mead and honey cakes awaited. Sir Reginald raised his glass. To new beginnings, and to those whose kindness transforms adversity into opportunity. Glasses chimed, and voices echoed with laughter and cheer. Poirot joined the circle, accepting a goblet of warm mead with a thoughtful nod. In the corner, Mrs. Pender exchanged warm embraces with Mrs. Smythe, both now partners in the greenhouse's success. Timothy and Finch compared spring bulb catalogues, while Violet sketched floral motifs on the margin of her programme. Poirot observed the scene, his own heart aglow. The tapestry of Thornwick's history, woven with betrayal, forgiveness, and unflagging care, displayed its final pattern. Living Testament to Renewal. As the fire's embers glowed low, Poirot set down his mead and tapped his cane. Mes amis, the seasons will turn, and new mysteries will beckon. But here, at Thornwick, the greatest secret has been revealed, the power of kindness to heal both soil and soul. May that secret endure. A last chorus of "Hear, hear" rose, and the gardens beyond glimmered in the lantern-lit dusk. A final promise that Thornwick's legacy, like its gardens, would flourish for generations to come. Chapter 16. The Seasons of Promise. Nearly a year had passed since Hercule Poirot first set foot upon the gravel drive of Thornwick Manor. To the very day, Lady Eleanor noted with a gentle smile. Now, in mid-April, the manor awakened again to the soft sigh of spring. Tulip petals unfurled in jewelled cups, lily of the valley nodded in shaded borders, and the arching rose pergola bore its first blush of buds. Yet beyond the riot of colour, a deeper transformation had taken hold. Thornwick's gardens were no longer merely a spectacle, but a living legacy, woven into the rhythms of the community it served. On this bright morning, Lady Eleanor stood beneath the rose arbour, her gown of delicate green silk echoing the new shoots above. Beside her, Sir Reginald adjusted the ribbon upon a wreath of daisies, an emblem of simplicity and hope. Colonel Fitzroy, in his tailored tweeds, supervised the last placements of hay bales for the Academy's children's programme, while Dr. Eleanor Grant marshalled apprentices in the herb garden, their notebooks already filled with observations of young hyacinths and marjoram. Poirot arrived at the gate in a modest motor car, his keen eyes bright beneath his bowler. Though his coat bore traces of London's drizzle, his posture remained impeccable, his moustache quivering in anticipation. He tipped his hat to the gatekeeper, then passed under the pergola, where vines of phoenix ascendant climbed once more toward the sky. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot!" Lady Eleanor cried, stepping forward. She slipped an arm through his. "You honour us again." "Madam, it is not I who honours Thornwick," Poirot replied, his voice warm. "It is this garden, your stewardship, and the community's devotion that offer the true splendour." Sir Reginald approached, offering a sprig of pale jasmine. "May I present you this as a token of our gratitude, and as a symbol of our ever-blooming friendship?" Poirot accepted the sprig with a flourish. "I shall wear it proudly, monsieur." Beyond the arbour lay the Academy's marquee, now festooned, with rattling birds' nests, installations for the Children's Sanctuary Project, and a sign announcing this year's theme, Seed to Symphony, the Music of Growth. Within, tables held tiny planters, seed packets, and watercolour sets for botanical sketches. At one table, Timothy Ward guided a circle of village children in pressing violet petals into soft clay, while Mrs. Pender demonstrated proper layering for cold frames. Poirot paused by the main demonstration area, where Mr. Byron and Mr. Finch had set out compost bins and soil test kits. The two men exchanged precise spade strokes before Mr. Byron turned to greet Poirot. "Monsieur, your notes on layered compost last year revolutionized our methodology. We owe this surplus patch to your formulas." Poirot smiled. "A garden's music is composed in layers, leaf and loam, root and rain. I am pleased it attunes your success." Nearby, Colonel Fitzroy prepared a line of wooden stools beneath the orchard pavilion for an apple grafting workshop. He nodded in Poirot's direction. "Join us for the grafting demonstration. There are a few rare malice varieties awaiting your expert eye." "I shall," Poirot said. "But first, I wish to visit a rose that owes its very name to my visit." He turned to Lady Eleanor. "Shall we see Thornwick Pride?" She led him along the shaded walk toward the north wall, where the two-toned buds of Thornwick Pride trembled in the breeze. Once so withered and now so resolute, the vine clung to the trellis in riotous abundance. Poirot knelt beside the rosebed, placing a gloved finger on the moss-ringed base, where see how firm the roots have grown, tenacious as truth itself. He plucked a single gold and crimson bloom, a reminder that even from deepest winter, hope may ascend. Lady Eleanor watched him, tears of joy bright in her eyes. "Thank you for naming it, Hercule. Its story shaped ours." He rose, rose in hand, and presented it to her. She pinned it to his lapel, and he touched its petals gently. Across the garden, Violet Carstairs had assembled her first cohort of botanical illustrators, advanced students now poised to contribute to Thornwick's yearbook of plant studies. She caught Poirot's eye, bowed, and beckoned him. He followed her to a long table where children and adults sketched the emerging flowers in watercolour, their brushes dancing like notes on a staff. "Madame Carstairs," Poirot said, "your student's work carries the garden's melody into colour. Each petal becomes a stanza of celebration." Violet smiled. "We hope to publish next season's anthology, Whispers of Thornwick, with lessons in art and in patience." Poirot nodded. A worthy title. The hour approached for the fundraising auction under the old fountain, now crowned with jasmine festoons. Sir Reginald raised his voice to gather everyone's attention. He held aloft a copper kettle once used to water the Phoenix Ascendant Rose, now polished to brilliance. This kettle, ladies and gentlemen, symbolizes the rhythm of giving and receiving. Who will bid to support next season's scholarships? Hands shot up. Each bid met with cheerful rivalry. When the hammer fell, the kettle sold for a generous sum that would endow several apprenticeships. Applause followed, and laughter rang out like bells in the breeze. Poirot allowed himself a satisfied grin. The community's generosity had achieved yet another crescendo. As midday waned, Dr. Grant guided a procession to the herb beds for tea-making lessons. Each guest selected fresh mint, lemon balm, and rosemary, crushing leaves between fingers before infusing them in steaming water. Poirot sipped his cup, inhaling the blend's bright aroma. He turned to Colonel Fitzroy. "My dear Colonel, you must agree that Thornwick has grown beyond even our highest hopes." Fitzroy wiped his brow and nodded. "And you, Hercule, have been its constant conductor." Poirot quipped, "A conductor does not make the music. The musicians do. Here, every hand has played its part beautifully." As afternoon light softened, Lady Eleanor gathered her circle once more in the drawing-room for a brief address. She thanked each contributor by name. Mrs. Pender, now celebrated for her greenhouse excellence. Mr. Finch, the master of soil. Timothy, whose instruction blossomed in young hearts. And Violet Byron, Dr. Grant, and Colonel Fitzroy, whose expertise had forged a community of practice. Poirot rose to offer a final reflection. "My friends, Thornwick's story stands as proof that gardens and people are born anew when nurtured by honesty, compassion, and patience. You have not merely restored a landscape, you have restored lives. May your work continue, as perennial as the roses, as enduring as the seasons." He paused, then added softly, "And as for this detective, my travels call once more. Yet my heart remains entwined with Thornwick, its roses and its people." They exchanged embraces. Lady Eleanor's gentle clasp, Sir Reginald's warm handshake, Colonel Fitzroy's firm shoulder pat, and Violet's lingering hug. Mrs. Smythe pressed his hand, Mr. Finch saluted, Timothy bowed, and even Mrs. Pender offered a reflective smile of newfound faith. Outside, the walled garden's gate stood ready for the carriage. This time, Poirot stepped into an open motor car, its engine purring beneath a cherry-wood dashboard. He settled into the back seat, glancing once more at the rose arbour, its new buds promising future glory. Lady Eleanor and Sir Reginald stood by the gate, their forms framed by the blossoming arch. Colonel Fitzroy raised a final salute, and Dr. Grant, Violet, Mrs. Smythe, Mr. Finch, and Timothy clustered for a final wave. Each face shone with affection and gratitude. Poirot tipped his hat. "Adieu, mes amis, until the next bloom calls me back." The motor car rolled forward, wheels crunching on the gravel. Beyond the walled garden, the orchards glimmered with tender shoots, and the greenhouse's glass panes reflected the afternoon sun. Thornwick Manor, once fraught with discord, now thrummed with the symphony of growth and goodwill. As the car glided down the drive, Poirot allowed himself a serene smile. He knew that wherever he travelled, in grand cities or remote villages, the lessons of Thornwick would echo, that in every human heart, as in every garden, the promise of renewal waits just beneath the surface, and with careful tending, spring will always return. Chapter 17. The Legacy of Thornwick. A soft dawn mist curled among the beeches as the carriage bearing Hercule Poirot reached the gates of Thornwick Manor one last time. Though spring's resplendence had given way to summer's full glory, today's visit held a different purpose. A final inspection before Poirot embarked on new mysteries. Lady Eleanor Aldridge greeted him with her characteristic grace, Sir Reginald at her side, both clad in light walking attire, suited for a morning in the walled garden. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Eleanor said, offering her arm, "we knew you could not stay away, for you are part of Thornwick's very fabric. Come, let me show you how your influence has endured." They passed beneath the rose arbour, vibrant with newly trained climbers of Phoenix Ascendant, now heavy with double blooms. Pollinators danced between petals, and below them a carpet of thyme and chamomile released its heady perfume. Timothy, Ward led the way along the central path, where engraved stones now marked each annual rose planting. Those first timid buds of Thornwick pride, the harvest home dahlias of autumn, the Phoenix Ascendant, and last season's trial, Variety, Silver Dawn, whose silvery petals glowed at twilight. "Each stone tells a story," Timothy explained. "Villagers come, read the inscriptions, and recall the lessons they learned here." Poirot glanced at the nearest marker, Thornwick Pride, planted April 30, 1927, resilience nurtured through vigilance. He nodded approvingly. An elegant testament. Beyond Mr. Byron and Mrs. Smythe inspected a new bed of heirloom tomatoes under Mrs. Pender's direction. The greenhouses, once a refuge in winter, now brimmed with orchids, ferns, and seedlings destined for local school gardens. Mrs. Pender paused her pruning to bow. Monsieur Poirot, our production has nearly doubled since last year. We supply the village and teach them propagation methods. Poirot raised his cane. Marvellous! You have transformed adversity into abundance. They crossed to the herb garden, where Dr. Grant guided a small group of mothers and children in preparing herbal salves. She offered each child apopet to measure calendula tincture into small jars of beeswax. As she spoke of anti-inflammatory properties, parents nodded appreciatively. Dr. Grant turned to Poirot. Your focus on healing, soil and soul inspired this program. We now hold fortnightly clinics here, using garden-grown remedies for common ailments. Poirot smiled, a fitting union of knowledge and kindness. Under a shade pavilion, Colonel Fitzroy directed a jousting demonstration of a different sort, a lively competition of wheelbarrow races among local youths. Laughter rang through the garden as children steered their carts along marked lanes, while adults cheered from benches draped with climbing roses. Colonel Fitzroy caught Poirot's eye and raised a gauntlet, a padded gardening glove, in salute. Our summer fete begins in earnest, sir. The community thrives on these light-hearted contests. Poirot chuckled. A splendid way to sow unity. Lady Eleanor led them next to the vegetable plot, where Mr. Finch displayed a record board. Harvest yields, crop rotations, soil amendment schedules, all meticulously recorded. Surrounding him, advanced students plotted next season's planting grid on graph paper. Mr. Finch, Poirot said, your agronomic records rival any university's. Is it true you now consult for farms beyond Thornwick? Finch beamed. Yes, monsieur. I advise 3 nearby estates and a cooperative of smallholders. They've seen average yields increase 20%. Poirot tapped his cane. Remarkable. From poisoned soil to fields of plenty. They paused at the orchard's edge, young apple trees heavy with small green fruit. The branches dipped under the weight, supported by Colonel Fitzroy's careful trellising. Sir Reginald plucked a single apple and offered it to Poirot. Taste the autumn promise, he said. Poirot took a bite, the crisp sweetness bursting. Thornwick's orchards bear not only fruit but hope. As they moved back toward the house, Lady Eleanor paused beneath a trellis, overgrown now with wisteria, its early clusters of violet blossoms a riot of colour. This trellis, she said, was the first we rebuilt after the blight. Its flowers remind me that beauty can follow aftermath. Poirot placed his hand upon the trellis. And that in every devastation lies the seed of renewal, should one but care to tend it. They entered the conservatory, where Violet Carstairs had arranged a small exhibition of student artworks, watercolours, charcoal sketches, and ink studies of Thornwick's blooms. Each piece bore a caption describing the plant's history. Rose of Remembrance, Harvest Flame, Phoenix Ascendant, and Wisteria Waltz. Violet stepped forward, bowing. Monsieur Poirot, these illustrations aim to record both botanical detail and the emotions each blossom evokes. I hope they serve as inspiration for future generations. Poirot studied a vibrant sketch of the Phoenix Ascendant in full bloom. Your artistry captures more than form. It captures spirit. At last, they gathered in the great drawing room, its walls now adorned with framed botanical prints and a large tapestry depicting Thornwick's gardens in stylized blooms and vines. Lady Eleanor poured tea, pale jade in delicate cups. "My friends," she said, raising her china, "this home and this garden have been our crucible and our canvas. We began in ruin, but have created sanctuary. As you depart to your endeavours, may Thornwick's lessons accompany you." Sir Reginald stood to propose the toast. "To Hercule Poirot, whose little grey cells cast light where once there was only shadow." Glasses chimed, and Poirot inclined his head, his moustache quivering with emotion. "Madame, monsieur," he began, "Thornwick's true miracle lies not in the blooms we cultivate, but in the hearts we nurture. Your steadfast devotion transformed a poisoned plot into perennial promise. I depart today richer in faith that compassion, like a rose, can withstand every season." He paused as the guests rose to surround him, each offering thanks and warm embraces. Colonel Fitzroy clasped his shoulder. "Safe travels, Hercule." Dr. Grant pressed a sachet of lavender into his hand. "For peaceful dreams on the road." Violet laid a folded sketchbook beside his tea. "For inspiration wherever you roam." Mr. Byron offered a vial of heirloom tomato seeds. "For new gardens." Mrs. Smythe and Mr. Finch placed a small wooden trowel, inscribed with Thornwick's first prize and the date, into his palm. Timothy pressed a fresh daisy corsage to Poirot's lapel. "For remembrance." Mrs. Pender, with tears glimmering, gave him a pressed sprig of wisteria. "For growth." Sir Reginald and Lady Eleanor stepped forward, enveloping him in a final gentle embrace. As he stepped back, Poirot raised his cane in farewell. "Adieu, mes amis. May your gardens and your lives ever flourish." He turned toward the great doors, walking with measured dignity. Through the windows, the gardens glowed in spring's gentle light. Ribbons of colour, the hum of bees and the promise of every new bud. Behind him, Thornwick Manor stood steadfast, its legacy sealed in soil, art, and the enduring grace of human kindness. And as the carriage rolled away, carrying Hercule Poirot toward fresh mysteries, the bees in the rose arbour stilled to watch him go, their wings pulsing like petals in a breeze of silent applause. Chapter 18. The Everlasting Bloom. A golden haze of late afternoon sunlight danced through the tall mullioned windows of Thornwick Manor's great hall, illuminating dust motes that floated like tiny petals in the air. Outside, the walled garden rested in dignified repose, its rose pergola draped now in summer's fading blossoms, its borders lush with lavender, foxglove, and the last of the daylilies. But within these walls, a more poignant bloom was at hand, the final gathering of those who had journeyed from ruin to renewal under Hercule Poirot's guidance. Lady Eleanor Aldridge stood to receive her guests, her gown of pale rose silk reflecting the soft glow of the lamps. Sir Reginald at her side offered a warm smile to Colonel Fitzroy. Dr. Grant, Violet Carstairs, Mr. Byron, Mr. Finch, Timothy Ward, and Mrs. Smythe. Even Mrs. Pender, once the architect of the garden's peril, appeared serene, in a simple, well-fitting dress, her hands folded before her in humble gratitude. At the room's centre stood Hercule Poirot himself, bowler hat removed, cane resting thoughtfully by his feet. His little grey cells shone brightly beneath his moustache, now tinged with a rare softness. As the company settled into chairs and settees, arranged in a generous semicircle, Lady Eleanor called the room to quiet. "Friends," she began, her voice steady with emotion, "this evening marks not an ending, but the beginning of Thornwick's next chapter. Thanks to Hercule Poirot, our gardens have flourished, our hearts have healed, and our community stands united in purpose. Tonight, we honour his legacy and pledge to carry it forward in all seasons to come." A gentle round of applause followed. Poirot inclined his head, then rose to speak. "Madame, monsieur, and dear friends," he said, "it has been my profound privilege to witness Thornwick's metamorphosis. Yet, in truth, the miracle belongs to you, the stewards, the learners, and the friends who refuse to let tragedy define this place. I merely pointed the way. You planted, pruned, and persevered." He paused, his gaze moving from face to face. "A garden's true beauty lies not in its petals alone, but in the resilience of its roots. Thornwick's roots, its values of compassion, confession, and collaboration, now run deeper than any rose cane. And so tonight, let us plant one final seed of promise." Poirot gestured to a slender table at the side of the hall, draped in crisp linen. Upon it rested a single, extraordinary gift, a boxed edition of Thornwick's Horticultural Almanac, its cover embossed with the phoenix rose emblem and the motto, "From ashes we bloom." Inside lay contributions from every academy instructor: Colonel Fitzroy's orchard guides, Dr. Grant's herbal recipes, Mr. Byron's composting charts, Mrs. Smythe's cultivation diaries, Violet's botanical illustrations, Timothy's classroom exercises, Mr. Finch's soil logs, and even Mrs. Pender's greenhouse schedules, testimony to her redemption and dedication. "This almanac," Poirot continued, "records not only plants and patterns, but the spirit that nurtured them. It shall serve as both a guide and a reminder that even the direst winter yields to spring's call when hearts and hands work in harmony." Lady Eleanor accepted the book with trembling hands. "Thank you, Hercule. We will treasure and expand its pages for all who seek Thornwick's counsel." She looked at Sir Reginald, who placed a rosebud in the almanac's open clasp, a living bookmark for the story they had written together. Poirot's expression softened. "And now, mes amis, a final ritual." He raised his cane with quiet authority. Behind him, 2 footmen entered bearing a silver urn. With careful precision, Colonel Fitzroy poured its contents. Mixed seeds from each of Thornwick's major plantings into a communal planter set upon a low pedestal. As lavender, rose hips, bee balm, and lily seeds mingled, each guest approached to add a pinch from their own small vial of seeds. Violet placed hers first, then Mrs. Smythe, Dr. Grant, and the others until even Mrs. Pender stepped forward, her hand shaking with hope as she added her last seeds. Finally, Poirot approached, pausing to let the urn's final measure fall. The planter now brimmed with the promise of a wildflower meadow, a living mosaic of Thornwick's journey. "May this planter," Poirot intoned, "stand at the garden's gate as a beacon to all who enter, that every ending concede a new beginning, and every setback may bloom into triumph. He pressed the soil gently, then placed a small polished plaque at its edge, "Seeds of Thornwick planted, April 30th, 1928, a testament to growth, forgiveness, and unity." Softly, the company circled the planter, touching the dark earth in a silent vow to nurture its wild promise. Then, at Lady Eleanor's signal, they returned to the drawing-room for the evening's last pleasure, a feast of orchard fruits and garden teas. As tables laden with apple tarts, elderflower wine, herb-infused, breads and rosewater confections were revealed, laughter and conversation rose once more. Colonel Fitzroy challenged Sir Reginald to a toast-drinking contest. Gentle fun, of course, while Dr. Grant offered tinctures to aid digestion. Violet serenaded the company with a lilting harp melody, her chords weaving through the room like flower petals on the breeze. Poirot reclined in a high-backed chair, tea in hand, content to observe. He saw in every smile the resilience that had grown here, in every handshake the bonds that had been reforged. In Mrs. Pender's serene expression, he witnessed the power of mercy. In Timothy's confident posture, the fruit of his apprenticeship. In Mrs. Smythe's poised calm, the rewards of steadfast labour. As the evening waned, Lady Eleanor rose for one final tribute. "To Hercule Poirot," she said, her clear voice carrying, "whose wisdom taught us that gardens and lives thrive when tended with honesty, patience, and love." Glasses lifted once more, and Poirot rose to join the toast, his eyes misting with quiet pride. "À la prochaine enquête," he declared with a wry smile. "To the next mystery." With that, the company drained their cups, and the last lanterns flickered in the drawing-room's twilight. Outside, the newly planted wildflower plot awaited its first rains, ready to scatter its rainbow promise across Thornwick's fertile grounds. Hercule Poirot, detective of crime and connoisseur of the human heart, walked from the great hall, that night knowing that the greatest mystery of all was the resilience of compassion, which once sown will blossom forever, and so Thornwick Manor slept, its roses, its wildflowers, and its people at rest, poised to awaken again each spring, to the everlasting bloom they had all helped to create.